Hey book readers. Alright, I have finished my reread of House of Sky and Breath. This is the complete recap. I'm going to give you all of the details that I guarantee you have forgotten because I forgot so much when I reread this. So this is your chapter by chapter summary so that you're ready for HOFAS next Tuesday. There were so many things that I had forgotten when I read this. I had forgotten entire characters, entire storylines. The amount of loose threads that have been left from this book that are going to be brought up again in book 3, I cannot wait. I also have so many more theories after reading this again more in depth because the first read through, I don't even think it's possible to understand everything that Sarah J. Maas sprinkled inside of this. I'm really excited to share this with you and to read book 3 coming up. So let's jump right in. Everyone was thrown off by the start of House of Sky and Breath because it starts with characters that we don't even know. It starts off with a prologue detailing Ophion rebels rescuing children from a rebel death camp. Ophion is the name of the rebels that have been at war with the Asteri for decades. Sophie Renast is a new character that we're meeting, and she enlisted with Ophion in order to use their networks to find where her brother was taken after her parents and grandparents were killed by the Republic. So after 3 years, they finally found him in Kavala, which is a death camp for rebels. Before she enters the camp, Sophie had covertly gathered intel with information that could be the final piece of the war with the Asteri, but she didn't give it to them because she wanted to make sure that they would keep their promise on getting her and her brother out of the death camp. So Sophie is a Thunderbird, which is basically a human that has power to capture any kind of energy, electricity, first light, any kind of energy, and wield it however she wants. She's also one of the rare humans who has completed the drop. She completed it illegally in a back alley so she could obtain the healing benefits it held. She was encouraged by her parents to complete the drop because of the power she had even though she was a human. So she goes to the Kavala death camp, she makes it out with her brother and 11 other children from the death camp, and she meets up with another agent who she doesn't even know his real name despite being in love with him. We're told he also has powers, but we don't know anything else about him yet, except they call him Agent Silverbow. Sophie and the kids make it to the boat that will take them to their escape when the Dreadwolves get to them. The Dreadwolves are the guards of the camp. Sophie stays back to buy them time, and she electrocutes all of the Dreadwolf guards, and she thinks she can make it back to the boat. But the Hind is here, who is part of Sandriel's old Triari, and she is her spy master who's known for torturing people. So the Hind has been sent by the Asteri to take Sophie because of the intel she knows. On the escape, Agent Silverbow is shot with a Gorgon bullet, which nullifies his power, so he can't help her. We know he has some kind of power that would have been able to help her, but it doesn't say what power he has, and he's shot with his bullet, so he can't help her. Sophie gets all of the kids onto the boat. Agent Silverbow is on the boat. She kills all of the Dreadwolves using her Thunderbird power by electrocuting them while they're standing in water. She thinks she can make it back to the boat, but she can feel Omega boats coming, the Asteri's submarines. Her brother in the camp is named Emil. He's also a Thunderbird, and Emil sinks all of them so that they can get away. When Sophie's trying to make it back to the boat, she's also shot with the Gorgon bullets so that she can't make it back to the boat. The Hind and the Dreadwolves take Sophie in a boat out to the middle of the sea, and they ask her who else she told the intel to. She tells them no one, and the Hind threatens to throw her overboard, and she drops a small white stone into the water so that she can demonstrate how deep it is, and then she pushes Sophie overboard with weights on her ankles. So then the prologue has ended with Sophie being dropped into the ocean with weights on her ankles, and her brother Emil on the boat with Agent Silverbow escaping the Asteri, and then we don't know what happens. So then it goes to chapter 1, and this is where we see Bryce for the first time. So Bryce is with her parents at the Crescent City Ballet. They're waiting for Hunt to join them. They're there to watch Juniper perform. Since everything has happened in the spring, a lot has changed. Bryce works for the Fae Archives now. She catalogs ancient artifacts, and she hasn't talked to the Autumn King since everything happened. She says within a day of everything happening in the spring, Jesiba had cleared out the gallery and the books that remained of the ancient Great Library of Parthos, and now Bryce is famous. She's really well known, and she's often stopped by people to thank her, and she's the subject of many stares, and she's not really used to that. She's trying to get used to that. Before she was able to close all of the gates, 5,000 people of Crescent City had died, and that Hunt had been lucky. The first light from her drop healed him just as he was taking his last breaths. Hunt is now second in command at the 33rd, working with Isaiah, and Hunt and Bryce have made an agreement to get to know each other over the summer and autumn and wait 4 months until the winter solstice to act on their desires. Bryce Bryce says she didn't want to rush into things, and she wanted them to get to know each other without the chaos of everything that happened before. So Bryce is enjoying their time together while also counting down the days. At the ballet, while thinking of her feelings for Hunt, the star in her chest starts to glow. She has no control over when it starts or stops glowing, and she's embarrassed by it glowing in the dim theater. So Hunt covers the light with his hand until it goes out. Bryce says that she's developed a keen awareness of his presence, like scenting lightning on the wind. She knows if he's there when he only enters a room by a surge of power in her body, like her magic, her very blood answered to his, is what it says. It says this all throughout the book in different ways, and I feel like this is Sarah J. Maas trying to tell us over and over that they are mates and they have some biological connection. That's just my theory. That's not written in the book. After the ballet, Bryce and Hunt go to Rune's house for a party to celebrate Juniper. Tons of people are there, but they mostly stick to themselves. They hang out with Fury and June. Hunt knows there's more behind the bargain he made with Bryce than just getting to know each other. He thinks that she needs the time to sort out her guilt for the people who hadn't survived the attack and sorting out how to allow herself to be happy. Because this was something she struggled with after Danica and the pack died, and now she still kind of struggles with it again, of all of these bad things have happened. Why is it that she's allowed to survive and be happy? Then Hunt receives an email from Isaiah with the names of the new archangels that the Asteria assigned to Micah and Sandriel's territories. So Ephraim, who we don't know much about, has been assigned to Sandriel's position in northern Pangaea, and an archangel named Celestina to Crescent City. So this is the first we're meeting both of them, and everyone's really apprehensive about what will happen. Basically, we just know Celestina comes from Nana, which is a very small territory close to the Northern Rift, where she didn't even have her own Triari because it was so small. So everyone is wondering why the Asteri chose her to come to Crescent City, but they're just gonna wait and see. So then in chapter 3, we get Rune's POV. He's hooking up with a fawn from the party. He feels a little bit guilty for fooling around because he's still technically betrothed to Queen Hypaxia, who's now the queen of the Valbaran witches, but he still plans to take advantage of all his freedoms until he's officially married. And Rune is interrupted when Declan's security system picks up something circling the house. Then all of a sudden, a familiar Fae male enters through something that looks like a portal, and we don't know who it is, but they know who it is. This is where we meet Cormac. He is the crown prince of the Avalan Fae and described as Rune's cousin on his mom's side because his mom is from the Avalan Fae. He says that the High King of the Avalan Fae and the Autumn King have announced his betrothal to Bryce, that they are to be married, and everyone is like, what the heck is going on? Side note here, I found it very interesting that they introduced his father as the High King of the Avalan Fae. I'm like, this can't be a coincidence between the High Lords. So I have no idea. We'll see. Cormac is the cousin that Rune fought during his ordeal to retrieve the Star Sword who almost killed him. Cormac had been raised thinking he would get the Star Sword because he had Starborn abilities. So when Rune got it, he wasn't happy. So pretty much we're introduced to him as like an enemy to us. We don't like him. And nobody's happy that Bryce has been betrothed to him. Then Hunt and Bryce leave and they go back to her apartment. And when they get there, Ethan Holstrom is laying in her floor bleeding out. And all throughout this book, it just jumps between scenes. So it's kind of jumpy, but you just have to keep up. Then we see Therian again, who we remember is Hunt's contact in the House of Many Waters, and he's a mare, which is like a merman. I always thought it was mer, but the audiobook pronounces that as mare, so we're gonna go with that. Therian was sent by the River Queen to the Haldron Sea in Pangaea to search for Sophie Renast's body. So the waters had whispered to her where she was dumped with lead blocks attached by chains, and the River Queen wants her body, dead or alive. So Therian searches and searches and searches, and he finds the lead blocks, but there's no body, and the shackles on the chains had been unlocked. So he questions if Sophie's still alive or if somebody came and got her body, and the River Queen orders him to find Sophie. She thinks Sophie is searching for her brother Emil, so then she tells Therian to find the brother, because if he finds the brother, then they'll find Sophie, and she wants them both. Then it goes back to Ethan, and it says that Ethan was beat to a bloody pulp by Sabine and the other wolves because he stood up for Bryce in an article, that Sabine was saying nasty things about Bryce, and that Ethan stood up for her and everything that she did in the spring. And because of that, they kicked him out and beat him up. The Pax Omega, which is like the weakest member of the pack, who's named Perry, which is also Amelie's sibling, had brought Ethan to Bryce's apartment because she remembered they were friends. Bryce tells him he can stay, although there's still some bad blood between Bryce and Ethan and Hunt because of the way Ethan acted to Bryce after the pack died. Bryce tells him he can stay. Hunt isn't so inclined to forgive Ethan for how he treated Bryce after the murders, but Bryce lets him stay. Bryce makes Ethan sleep in the same bed as her because she wants to keep an eye on him and she doesn't want to lose loses him too. And this bothers Hunt. Even though he trusts Bryce, he's like super jealous. Then they finally talk to each other, and Bryce tells him that Connor and the pack held the Reapers off during the demon attack so that Danica could help her make the drop that day, and that Connor saved her. Ethan tells her that Connor loved her and that Connor had thought Bryce was his mate. So here it describes a little bit about the different meanings of a mate to the different species. To the wolf shifters, mate means one's true lover, like predestined by their goddess Urd. But to the Fae, a mate is a bond deeper than marriage, beyond one's control. It's someone that you have no choice if it's your mate or not. And then to angels, a mate just means something similar to marriage. So all of the species use the word mate, but they don't mean the same things. Then Bryce tells Ethan that she loved Connor too, and then they go to sleep. So the next day, Rune, Cormac, and the Autumn King discuss the betrothal to Bryce. The Autumn King says there will be no debate about who Bryce and Rune are marrying, that he has arranged both of them to be married and no one is going to argue with him. Rune learns that Hypaxia has necromancy powers from her father, so that means that she can raise and speak to the dead. Rune also finds out that Hypaxia's half-sister is the Hind, who's named Lydia Servos, who didn't inherit witch gifts from her mother, but she received shape-shifting gifts from her father, and then she was given to her father's kin because of it. So Hypaxia and Lydia Servos were both born to the former queen of the witches, but they had different fathers, and because Lydia didn't inherit the witch gifts, she was sent to live with her father, who was a shapeshifter. Lydia is the Hind, who was the spy master in Sandriel's Triari, who is known for torturing people. Then the Autumn King tells him that Cormac will always be the son he should have had, rather than the one he was burdened with. So just more times of the Autumn King being terrible. So then back at Bryce's apartment, Ethan and Hunt go back and forth with each other. Hunt asks Ethan why he's being nice to Bryce now after everything. Ethan says if Connor and the pack aren't holding a grudge against her, then why should he? And Ethan tells Hunt that Connor loved Bryce for 5 years and had just gotten her to agree to a date. So basically, good luck waiting on Bryce since Hunt has only known her for 5 months. Then Bryce calls Jessica to ask a question for something at her job at the Fae Archives. Bryce briefly mentions Thur, which is a nearly forgotten storm deity who has a planet named after him. And this name comes up several times. It's almost like we are thinking maybe there is some tie to Hunt and to Hunt's background, which we know we're going to learn more about in the next book because Sarah J. Maas has told us we're going to learn where Hunt came from and more about his history. So there's a brief mention of Thur, and then Jessica tells her she knows about her betrothal to Cormac and asks her what she plans to do about it and what she'll do with her new powers. So Jessica is like, I want to know what you're going to do about all this. Bryce tells Jessica she was given an order by the Asteri to lie low, and Jessica says how terribly boring of her to obey them. Like, she's not expecting Bryce to obey, and she's kind of poking her to do something about stuff. Jessica says that Bryce and Rune are some of the only ones that she's seen be strong enough to shun what they are as chosen ones. She tells Bryce that she believes she's capable of many things if she was able to kill an archangel without access to any power. So Jessica is like trying to goad Bryce into doing something and not just lying low like the Asteri told her to. So after that, Cormac visits Bryce at work and tells her that the Oracle of Avalon said he was destined to unite with a princess who possessed a star in her heart, that their mingling would bring great prosperity to their people. He says once she bears him a few heirs, she can have whatever lovers she wishes and he will do the same, that the marriage doesn't need to be a burden on them. She says no thanks, and he says she has no choice. So pretty much Cormac thinks he's destined to be with Bryce because of what his oracle told him. Then Hunt, Isaiah, and Naomi meet the new Archangel Celestina. She's very nice and seemingly too good to be true. She tells them that the Asteri have ordered the remains of Sandriel's Triari to join them and become part of hers. The Asteri have taken Sandriel's Triari and split them up between hers and Ephraim's Triari. So the Hammer, which is Pollux, and the Hellhound, named Baxian, have been assigned to their unit. So we knew Pollux before, known as a terrible dude who enjoys torturing people and that he tortured Hunt, and now we're meeting Baxian for the first time. So as soon as they enter the room, Hunt and Pollux get in a fight when Hunt sees him, and they're both sent to the cells below the comitium, and Celestina calls Bryce to come get Hunt. Bryce tells Pollux that she's going to make his life a living hell if he touches Hunt again, and then Baxian tells Bryce he's glad someone finally put a bullet through Micah's head, and we're kind of surprised by that because we know Sandriel's Triari as like this big bad group, and we didn't expect him to say that, so we're kind of like, what? And we remember that. And Celestina says Hunt can go. Then Ethan is at Bryce's apartment processing that he is now a wolf without a pack, that it's known as a soul wound for wolves, but he says he survived a soul wound 2 years ago when he lost his brother and everyone, and that he will again. And so here in this scene, he tries to shift to his wolf form, and it's too painful, so he goes back to his humanoid form. Then it goes to Therian, who's researching Sophie Renast, and he's looking into the case himself since the River Queen wants everything kept a secret. He finds emails between a contact and and Sophie talking about Dusk's Truth and something called Project Thur, and he realizes that the contact was Danica. Everything in this stinking series comes back to Danica, and we are all so angry at her. So Danica had been emailing back and forth with Sophie Renast for 6 months leading up to Danica's death. She even sent one telling her to lie low when she found him and take him to the place they talked about where weary souls find relief from their suffering in Lunathian. It's kind of like a coded message that nobody knows what it means, but they want to figure out because they think that's where Sophie and Emil have gone. Then Therian finds a report of an abandoned boat nearby that he thinks Emil was on. When he gets there, he sends several human males and a female that are following the boy, and he sees an arm detached from a body with the uniform of Pippa Spetsos' Nightfall Squadron. Pippa Spetsos is a big bad lady in the Ophion rebels, and she's trying to work her way up to the Ophion command, and we know her to be crazy. Everyone describes her as a fanatic, and that she's basically a psycho. So Therian finds this arm that's been ripped from its body by a Sobek. The Sobek are the creatures that are under the water that are very dangerous. So Therian thinks that Emil is on foot and headed to Crescent City. So then Therian shows up at Bryce's and asks if Danica ever mentioned someone named Sophie. And Bryce is immediately like, what is going on? She wants to know anything and everything there ever is to know about Danica. He reluctantly shares what he's working on, even though the River Queen told him to keep it a secret. And he tells him about Sophie and Emil, that they're Thunderbirds and Emil was wanted by several powerful people. He says Sophie may have survived the Hind and no one knows if she's dead or alive. He tells him about the emails between Danica and Sophie, and Bryce says she can't stand by and do nothing while a kid is being hunted. Then Flynn and Declan and Rune come over and they talk about the ordeal. They all had gone through it together. Rune was 27 and had been sent by his father to look for a wife amongst the Avalon Fae. So the Valbaran Fae and the Avalon Fae hate each other and they are rivals. So on their visit, Declan was bragging to their king that Rune could get the sword and that one Valbaran Fae warrior was better than 10 from Avalon. So the king got ticked and he sent them to see if they could get the sword. And so he was basically like, oh really, you got big talk, go ahead and prove yourself. Go to these creepy caves and try to get the star sword that my son has been training his whole life to retrieve. Like he thought there's no way these idiots are going to be able to get it, they're going to die. He sends them into the caves and then he sends his son Cormac and his twin cousins to hunt them. So we only hear a little bit about these twin cousins and I find it to be very interesting and I wonder if they're going to show up again. But all we basically know is Cormac has cousins who are twins and they have the mind-speaking ability that Rune has, but Cormac says they aren't to be trusted. So just a random side note about them. But during the ordeal, the king sent them into the caves, sent Cormac and the twins after them. After Rune retrieved the sword, all of the evil things in the caves ran from him because they were scared of the sword and they ran straight toward Cormac and his cousins. And the king was not happy the sword had found Rune worthy. He did not expect that. That was Rune, Flynn, and Declan's ordeal because they had to fight all these crazy things in the caves. They also had to fight Cormac and the cousins. And during the whole thing, Cormac tries to kill them. He stabs Declan in the stomach. Everything is very gnarly and they all almost died. But Rune comes out with the star sword and has made an enemy of Cormac. So then after that, basically they're all still at her apartment and they're headed to bed. And Hunt says Bryce is sleeping with him that night. He is not going to let her sleep in the same bed as Ethan again. So then Bryce's mom, Ember, calls asking about her engagement, that she's heard about the betrothal to Cormac and she is ticked. Bryce tells her mom it's not a real engagement, just back off and cool down. While on the phone call, Hunt hears that Cormac had stopped by her work the day before and she had forgotten to tell him. So Hunt asks her to tell him everything whenever something happens and that they need to think through everything before they decide if they're helping Emil or not. So Hunt basically wants to back Bryce with whatever she does, but he's having like serious PTSD about the last time he chose to join a rebellion, rightfully so. Then Bryce meets with Fury and Juniper. She tells Fury about Sophie and Emil and asks if Danica ever mentioned them to her. Fury doesn't know anything about them, but she says the only secret she knows about Danica was that she was a bloodhound. More secrets about freaking Danica. So we learned Danica was a bloodhound, which means she could scent bloodlines and secrets in them, who they are, what they are, and where they came from. Fury says she only knew because when they first met, Danica scented what she is and confronted her, wanting to understand what she was scenting. She says Danica knew something dangerous about her, which is what she truly is, which none of us still know, and she knew something dangerous about about Danica that she was a bloodhound. They both had beef on each other, and it kind of balanced out. She says it's dangerous to be a bloodhound because people will pay highly to use the gift and to kill anyone with it because people have secrets and they don't want them to know. She also tells Bryce that the gift came from Danica's father, which we don't know anything about, that Danica had never told anything to Bryce about. She always acted like she just didn't have a father. She says it was only one of Danica's many powers. Bryce says she wants to help Emil, but she also wants to know what Danica was into. She wants answers about Danica. Then Celestina orders Baxian and Hunt to partner up. She tells Hunt he needs to help Baxian get settled in Crescent City and to teach him the ins and outs, because Baxian and Pollock come from Sandriel's Triary, which was in Pangera, and Pangera is very different than Crescent City. Crescent City is described as being modern, and Pangera is described as following the old traditions. So basically, they have no idea what to do with technology, and they still talk different, and they wear different clothes. It's very interesting. So then Baxian tells Hunt that he may not have been a slave as Hunt was, but he pretty much was when he was serving Sandriel, that he had no choice in serving Sandriel as Hunt had no choice in the things he had to do. And Baxian says he's happy to have a break from Pollux, and Hunt had thought that they were a good pair, that they were friends and like they were both bad dudes. Baxian is trying to say he is not the same as Pollux, and he implies that Pollux, the hammer, doesn't treat Lydia the hind well because the hammer and the hind are together. Then Therian gets to Bryce's apartment early to talk to Ethan. Ethan says he never talked to Danica about the rebels or the war. Nobody thought Danica was a rebel sympathizer. She had never talked about it. But that one time in college, she had told him she was researching something that could get her in trouble. And then later she just brushed it under the rug and said she had changed the topic for her college paper and she wasn't doing it anymore. But he knew that she was relentless and wouldn't have changed it without good reason. So he thinks she found something but kept it hidden. And then Therian stays to hang out with Ethan while they wait for Bryce. Next, Rune is talking to Bryce and telling her that she's a power player now, whether she likes it or not, and that any move she makes will be politicized and analyzed and could be viewed as an act of rebellion or outright war, since she's now a princess of the Fae, even though she's denying it. After that, Adis, the prince of the Chasm of Hell, shows up in his cat form in Bryce's apartment. So remember, in book 1, Adis showed up to Bryce when she was 13 as a cat, when she came out of the oracle and she was crying, and he was nice to her and kind of like encouraged her, and everyone was surprised by that because the princes of Hell were told to be these evil bad guys. So then in book 1, she summoned Adis to ask for help with everything that they were investigating, and if you remember, he told her to make the drop and then come find him so that they could end everything. And we were like, what does this mean? So here he shows up again. He asks Bryce why she doesn't know how to use her powers yet. He tells her that her light is the light of Starborn Queen Thea, and that he thinks she has her other gifts as well. Adis tells him that Pelias was not a true prince, but rather he appointed himself one when he forcibly wed Thea's daughter Helena after he killed Thea and stole her blade, which is the Star Sword. So they had known Prince Pelias to be this good Starborn prince who was the savior of all, but they're finding out that maybe that wasn't true, that he forcibly wed Lady Helena and killed her mother, Queen Thea, and stole the Star Sword. He says that the sword belongs to Thea's female heir, not to a male heir, and that Thea's other daughter got away and he never learned her fate, that he was powerless to help them because he arrived too late and he was vastly outnumbered. Adis was the one who had asked his oldest brother, the Prince of the Pit, to kill Pelias on the battlefield. So this is another thing that we all are kind of wondering if something is going to come about with Queen Thea's other daughter. So we get the name of her daughter Helena, who was forcibly married to Pelias, but we don't get the name of her other daughter, and we know they both have Starborn abilities. So we're wondering who that other daughter is, and we're thinking this is going to show up again in another book. Adis says he's telling them this now so that the past doesn't repeat itself, and he asks her if she's doing anything to help the endless war. Adis tells them it's time for them to make a push with the rebels. He says Hell is not their enemy, that the Asteri wrote that history and shouldn't be believed. Adis says the Asteri fed their lies to the ancestors of this world, that they forced scholars to write down their version of events under penalty of death and erased Thea from record. He says that the great library of Parthos that Jessica has hidden is what remains of the truth of the world before the Asteri. So Adis is like pushing them to get involved with the war, not to lie low, not to let the rebels do all this on their own, that they have responsibility and he wants them to join them. Adis says that the war is approaching its crescendo and her power isn't ready, that the attack on the city last spring with the creatures from Hell was a mistake. He says Micah had opened the pens to their pets and they ran amok, that the princes of Hell did not send these demons to hurt everybody, but it was just chaos. And he says Hell's armies will strike at Bryce's command, that it's her choice in the end, that it's always always been her choice, and if she needs to turn rebel and help Ophion, then so be it. He says he has no information about the connection between Danica and Sophie. Ada says he's telling them this now so that the past doesn't repeat itself. Then Cormac shows up at her apartment, and Adis tells them that Cormac is a member of the Ophion rebels, and Adis greets him as Agent Silverbow. So this is shocking to them because Cormac was their enemy. And then we find out he was Agent Silverbow, which is the agent who helped Sophie and Emil escape, and he was in love with Sophie. So the group talks to Cormac about his involvement with Ophion. He says he joined because he felt it was right, and basically that he was in love with Sophie. He tells them that he helped her and Emil escape Kavala, and that she had vital information that she kept from everyone to ensure that they would come to save them from the camp. He says that Danica had reached out years ago, telling Sophie she needed someone to retrieve information about something that she suspected about the Asteri, but that Danica couldn't get herself because she was too well known. But Sophie wasn't able to retrieve the information until just recently. He didn't know that Sophie might have escaped death. He had thought she died, and so when he hears that she might be still alive, he gets a renewed hope, and he's very determined to find her and Emil because he had promised Sophie he would take care of Emil. He also tells them that Sophie joined Ophion because the Asteri butchered her family and her Thunderbird ancestors, but her priority was her brother. Her priority was not the Ophion's cause as much as it was getting her brother. He says Emil got spooked by Pippa Spetsos after his escape because when he sank the Omegas, she was a little too eager to get him on the battlefield, and Cormac wasn't able to tell him he'd help before he escaped from Cormac and Pippa. So he lost Emil too, and he wants to find him. Bryce says she'll make a deal with him to help find Emil and get the intel Danica wanted Sophie to obtain, but she wants their engagement ended when she says it's time, and she wants him to teach her about her magic because he has similar powers. She says it's this deal or nothing, and Cormac agrees as long as she lets the engagement remain until his work for Ophion is complete because he needs a reason to be in Valbara. They all agree that they need to talk about it all and decide what they're going to do and get back to Cormac. They're not ready to agree right away. Cormac says beyond Emil and Sophie that their world could be free and that he's willing to die for the cause, and he's trying to encourage them to join him. So they all agree to think about it and reconvene the next night. Hunt and Bryce talk about their thoughts on everything. Bryce realizes they were never going to be allowed to live like normal people, that trouble would always find them because of who they were. Bryce thinks the intel Sophie had that Danica wanted is worth the risk it will be to search for Emil. Bryce tells Hunt she wants to get information against the Asteri, like they have information against them, that they killed the Archangels. She wants information about the Asteri so that there can be a balance of using it against each other so that they aren't being held under the Asteri. And Bryce says she feels like it's her responsibility to continue whatever Danica was doing, that it had to have been important. And she also tells him she doesn't want to wait for winter solstice, and they kiss in an alley, but Hunt realizes that one photo of them together and her engagement with Cormac would be off, so they stop kissing, and he says they can't be together in public. Hunt tells Bryce he'll do whatever she wants, that she was the one who had mentioned waiting until winter solstice before, so he wants her to make sure she's okay with ending their agreement early. Then when Ethan is messing around with Danica's sword at Bryce's apartment, he stands on the coffee table and the coffee table breaks, and it reveals a hidden compartment that has Danica's old college papers inside. And they were like, what is this? Then it goes to Rune, and he's telling Declan and Flynn everything that happened. He says they're the only people he would trust to tell, and Declan says he's immediately in with whatever Rune decides. So Rune goes to meet Cormac to listen to his pitch. In the hidden compartment of the coffee table, Bryce and Ethan find research from Danica questioning who and what the Asteri are. That they'd been told they had this enormous power from a star, like they themselves are holy stars, but that no one actually had proof of that, and Danica was starting to question that. And Bryce finds a paper titled Dusk's Truth, like the email to Sophie, but it's blank. Bryce thinks there's a connection between everything, she just can't figure out what it is. So Rune goes to meet Cormac, and he hears his pitch for joining Ophion. He tells Rune that they need his mind-speaking powers to communicate with their most vital spy on the inside, named Agent Daybright, that she has access to the Asteri, and she had been in contact with Sophie using this crystal-powered communication device. But now they think the devices are compromised, so they need someone with his abilities to be able to directly speak mind-to-mind with Daybright. Rune is surprised that Cormac knows about his mind-speaking because it's been kept a secret, but Cormac says he knows because when they fought in the caves, Rune, Declan, and Flynn had fought as one, and he knew that they had this ability because he's dealt with people who had it before. So Cormac Cormac tells Rune that the rebellion only has 10,000 members left, and they desperately need Daybright's information to keep their people alive. He wants to know if she has any updated information on planning an attack on the major railway in Pangera that the Asteri used for transporting supplies in the war, called the Spine. The rebels have been planning this attack on the Spine, but they need her information before it's a go, and he needs Rune to communicate with her about it. And also he needs an update because the Asteri were creating a mech suit for the Vanir. Right now, the only way that the human rebels are surviving in this war against the Vanir is because they've created mech suits using science and technology. And the humans get inside these mech suits and can fight against Vanir. And this is how they've sustained the war this long. But now, supposedly, the Asteri are making a mech suit for the Vanir. And the humans are worried about what could happen if they get that. So he wants an update from Daybright. Cormac gives Rune the only comm crystal they have left. And he's hoping that since it's on the same frequency as Daybright's crystal, that when Rune casts his mind out, he'll be able to find her through the same communicative properties of the gates in Crescent City, because it's made of the same crystal. So Rune agrees to help them, and Cormac tells him when he wants out, he'll get him out. Then Therian interacts with the River Queen's daughter, who he is betrothed to. He says she doesn't have a mare form, that she is an elemental humanoid, part river, part woman, and she can live above water or underwater. He describes their betrothal as more of an indentured servitude, and he wishes he could get out of it. Basically, when he was young, he just wanted to get with her, and so he swore himself to her, and he didn't realize he'd never be able to get out of it. So now 10 years later, he's still sworn to her, but he's never married her, and he uses any excuse he can get to get out of the Blue Court. And Therian says he plans to milk this investigation for all it's worth so he can stay above water as much as he can. I find it very interesting that we still don't know the River Queen's daughter's name. We also don't know the River Queen's name. There's a few characters who we don't know their names. And in my last recap, I said the same thing about the Autumn King, and then we found out his name in this book. When we meet Cormac, he tells us that the Autumn King's name is Einar, E-I-N-A-R. It doesn't ring any bells to me, but I still think something's going on with the Autumn King, and I don't know what it is. But I find it interesting that there's some characters that we don't know their real names, just their titles, and I keep wondering how it's all going to play out. You know that Sarah J. Maas is going to align it all in the most simple way. We just can't see it yet, which is something I love about her writing. So then Bryce tells Hunt that she has decided she definitely wants to help find Emil and the information that Sophie had retrieved, but that she can't do without him. He is terrified that something's going to happen to her, but he says he'll help her as long as they have an exit strategy. Then they fall asleep, and Hunt has a dream that isn't actually a dream. It's the Prince of the Pit of Hell, whose name we learn is Apollyon, and that he summoned Hunt into a pocket realm, which he tells us is a place between their two worlds. He calls him Orion and tells him he doesn't realize the power he has, and that he's only using a fraction of his gifts. Every time we meet someone new and like old, they always call him Orion specifically. And I am like, everyone knows of him as Orion, and what something's gonna happen with that. Apollyon tells him that he and Bryce's powers are more alike than they realize, and that they're both conduits. Apollyon tells him that he has no idea how valuable he is, him and the others like him. And we're like, who else is like Hunt? It's implying there's other beings like Hunt somewhere. And then Apollyon tells that the Northern Rift is groaning once again, and that he can smell war on the wind, war he doesn't plan to lose this time. Hunt tells him that he has no interest in having a demon prince for his ruler, and then he wakes up. Hunt and everyone has been taught their whole lives that the princes of hell are bad and they're enemies and they want war against their people. The things that Apollyon is saying is not lining up, and so he's confused. Next, Rune tries to contact Daybright with the comm crystal. She answers, and she appears to him as a female of pure flame, like a humanoid female body veiled by fire, and he can't tell who she is. Then he sees that his own form is silhouetted as the night sky, stars, and galaxies, and he tells her what Agent Silverbow said. She doesn't have any updates on the Spine, and to tell Agent Silverbow that safe passage is granted under the cover of the waning moon, and that he'll know what that means. And then she tells him that she much prefers this method of communicating. So Rune passes it on to Cormac, and he instructs Rune not to communicate with her again until he tells him to. Cormac tells them he's going to the Bone Quarter dock to talk to the Reapers and look for Emil. They warn him to be careful, that the Reapers are not people that he should mess around with. Then it goes to Celestina, and she reprimands Pollux and Baxian because they've gotten in a fight in public after Baxian attacked Pollux for coming onto a female who didn't want him to. She says the Asteria instructed her to give them a second chance, and also that she's been instructed to mate with Ephraim, to produce children and pass on their powers. So she gets Pollux and Baxine in trouble for this public fight, but we see that Baxine was standing up for this female who was being assaulted by Pollux, apparently. And it's just another weird thing that we're like, we thought Pollux was with the Hind, but apparently he doesn't care to get with other people. And also he's a bad guy because he's doing this to a female. So Celestina has been ordered to mate with the other archangel who's taken Sandriel's place because they want them to make powerful children. They are going to complete the mating ceremony in 1 month on the autumnal equinox, which is also known as Death Day because the veil between the living and the dead is the thinnest. And Celestina also tells Hunt that she had secretly been friends with Shahar. And remember, Shahar was his lover who had persuaded him and all of the angels into this rebellion 200 years ago that they lost that caused him to be enslaved and all of the above. Celestina says that she regretted her choice not to help in Shahar's rebellion every day. And she tells him that she tried to buy him 3 times during his enslavement, but that the Asteri wouldn't let her. And she says she wants to be friends and offers her help if he needs anything. He's surprised by all of this, but he tells her not to be sorry for everything that happened to him because without it, he wouldn't have met Bryce, and that every horror and every nightmare that had happened to him had been worth it to have met her. And you're like, oh my gosh. And it makes you just love him. Then we see that Ethan and Therian have been called to a crime scene, and Therian wants Ethan's help because he wants to be able to use his sense of smell as a wolf. Ethan picks up the scent of a female human and then a strange male human scent on the body. He thinks that the victim helped Emil get toward Lunathian and that the victim was tortured for the information and killed by Pippa Spetsos later. Then Bryce talks to Rune about the Fae prophecy that when knife and sword are reunited, so shall our people be. And she wonders if the Star Sword is meant for him and that maybe there's a knife out there somewhere for her. And she feels like there could be something out there guiding all of this, that there's something going on bigger than they can grasp, maybe to do with the gods or something, but she just has a feeling. And of course, remember, if you have read ACOTAR, you know something about this knife. And at the end of this book, we see it again. Then all of a sudden, a Reaper shows up, knocks Rune unconscious, and drags him into the sewers. Just very unexpected. So while Rune is unconscious, he knows something is happening, and Daybright speaks to him in his mind, telling him he's in danger and to wake up. She says she doesn't know what's happening to him or how she found his mind, but she felt something and the bridge was suddenly there. He thinks there's something familiar about her voice, and he thinks he can smell her scent and that it's familiar, but she says he doesn't know who she is because they've never met. So then the Reapers give a message to Bryce from Apollyon, the Prince of the Pit. He says he's ready to strike and he wants a worthy opponent who will not break as easily as Prince Pelias did. He wants to face her at her full power. They tell her to train harder and better, that he's waiting. They also tell her that he is hunting through the Bone Quarter to find the other one who might be his worthy opponent or his greatest weapon. So she thinks they're talking about Sophie or Emil. They give her these messages and then she fights them, and she cuts one of the Reapers with the Star Sword and it dies. They had thought that Reapers were already dead and could not be killed, that something dead could not already be killed. So they learned something about the Star Sword, that when Bryce wields it, she can kill things that are already dead. Then Cormac shows up and helps her fight the Reapers and saves her by teleporting. So we see that Cormac has powers of teleporting. Cormac grabs her and they teleport to the Ox Training Center. She resheathes the sword and its light dims, but it still sang. She didn't know what to make of it, that the blade had killed what was unkillable. So then the River Queen tells Therian that she wants a meal before any of the other river courts, and she wonders if the currents whispered to them what they whispered to her. And then Rune goes to the Autumn King and asks him the lore behind the Star Sword, and if it has any special powers or weird gifts. The Autumn King tells him that it's an ancient sword from another world, made from the metal of a fallen star, a meteorite. It exists beyond their planet's laws, and perhaps the Reapers sensed that, because in the fight the Reapers stayed away from it. They wouldn't touch it. The Autumn King says it is Bryce's fate to be tied to a powerful male, and that he doesn't want to learn what would come of the union with Hunt. So he betrothed her to Cormac to consolidate that power for the Fae. Pretty much he knows she's really powerful, and now he doesn't want her power to be shared with any other species, and so he tied her to Cormac. He tells Rune that he can't overstep his authority because as a king of the Fae, his authority has no limits. Rune says maybe it should, and the Autumn King says who's going to impose that against him? He doesn't think anyone can stop him. Then Bryce, Hunt, and Cormac are outside the Black Dock of the Bone Quarter. She asks him if she can teleport too. Cormac says that he can teleport anywhere if he knows the spot. He just needs exact coordinates, and his accuracy is within like 2 feet. Cormac says if it's within her wheelhouse, he'll teach her. He says when he was younger and realized he could do it, he thought it meant that the Star Sword would be his because he has the Starborn gifts. Bryce knows she has no chance to stand against Apollyon if she didn't expand her understanding of her power. Apollyon is also known as the Star Eater because he supposedly killed the 7th Asteri and that he ate her. So he's known as the Star Eater. Then she calls Jessica asking for another death mark. Jessica says she only has 2 left and she has to pay for them this time. Then Jessica pushes Bryce to wonder why Danica had spent so much time at the gallery. So each time she talks to Jessica is like leading her along to something. And I have a lot of questions about Jessica, especially with more of the things that are breadcrumbed in this book. I'm like, Jessica is somebody, okay? Jessica Roga is somebody and we're gonna find out, and I just want to know who she is. So then everyone is together at Bryce's apartment working on things. Declan is looking through footage, looking to see if they can find Sophie or Emil or where the Reapers came from that attacked Rune. Bryce is getting tired of all the surprises that Danica had for her, that she kept so many secrets. Me too, Bryce, I feel you. Then they look at footage of Reapers. Bryce notices that the Reapers she recognizes didn't take a boat over from the Bone Quarter and that it just appeared. And they think that's really weird. They follow it on the cameras, but they don't see where it came from. And then they make their own plan for going to talk to the Underking in the Bone Quarter, that they want to know if he was the one that sent the Reapers to attack them and if Emil is there. Then there's a scene where Bryce and Hunt go with Fury and Juniper to the Viper Queen's meat market to look for Emil. They find no trace of him, but we learn that Juniper had a brother who was a fighter for the Viper Queen who became addicted to her venom, and then he was locked in a contract as a fighter for her. Her parents had tried to get him out of this contract, even begging Micah the Archangel to do something, but no one could ever free him, and then he died in a fight 10 years ago. So Juniper has very strong feelings about the Viper Queen and the meat market, and Fury tells us one day she's going to burn it to the ground for her. And we're all like, what the heck is Fury? So then they decide they'll go ask the Underking about Emil tomorrow. Bryce and Hunt train together in the gym. She tells him that she loves him and he reciprocates, and then afterwards they talk about it. Hunt doesn't want to just gloss over the fact that she told him that she loved him, and they want to define what they are to each other. Bryce thinks boyfriend sounds too young for Hunt, so Hunt offers mate, and Bryce explains to him the weight that holds with the Fae, that it's a binding on a biological molecular level that can't be undone. He tells her that of everything he's ever been called, her mate would be the only one he truly cherished. Every time she describes something about what a mate means to the Fae, he says that that's what she means to him, that he feels a biological molecular connection to her. So they make this conscious decisions to label themselves as mates, which is different than we've seen in Sarah J. Maas's other books. And so I think that's maybe part of why people question if Bryce and Hunt are actually mates. But with the rest of the book, and also with the interview from Sarah J. Maas herself, I do not question them as mates personally. I think that they are for sure mates. Bryce says she doesn't want to keep it a secret from anyone, but they have to kind of lie low until the ruse with Cormac is over. So they label themselves as mates, but they don't tell anybody yet. Then Rune makes contact with Dave while he's sleeping, and they realize they don't need the crystals to communicate, that must have just been a beacon for their initial contact, but now they can communicate anytime, usually when one of them is sleeping or if they're unconscious. She tells him the hit on the spine is a go, and that there will be a mech suit prototype on the shipment. She recommends they destroy everything and not try to steal any of it, that they'll get caught if they do. And while they're talking, Rune is trying to find out clues about who she is. He wants to know her identity. And she tells him that he's giving away too much about himself, that pretty much he's a terrible rebel. He's telling her too much. She warns him to be more careful of what he tells people, even Ophion allies, because Ophion has ways of making people disappear. And when Rune asks about Sophie, she tells him not to use her real name, but to call her Agent Cypress. And when he asks her where she might be if she wasn't dead, Daybright leaves and says their meeting is over. Then Cormac, Rune, and Ethan go to pass on the intel to Ophion Command. Cormac tells Bryce that Hunt's scent on her will jeopardize their betrothal ruse. Then Bryce and Hunt go to the Bone Quarter to talk to the Underking. Before they sail off the dock, Baxian shows up. He sees them and asks what they're doing. So they're kind of worried about what he's going to do with the information, and they wondered why he was there, but they don't think he'll tell anyone. So then they pay the death marks into the river that they had got from Jessica, and a boat arrives to take them to the Bone Quarter. When they get there, Bryce summons the Underking by hitting the Star Sword against a raised obelisk from the ground. He arrives, and he's described as at least 10 feet tall, with robes of black velvet that drape to the ground, with darkness swirling on the ground before him, and his head is a desiccated corpse, half rotted and crowned with gold and jewels. He tells them he didn't send any Reapers over, that all his Reapers are accounted for, that the Reapers came from Hell because Hell first ruled them and the vampires, but they chose to stay in Midgard. And he isn't surprised some have returned to Hell. He says the Reapers that attacked them could have come from any of the necropolises, that the belief mortals have that Reapers don't travel far outside their own realms is a lie. He says whoever they're searching for isn't there. He tells them that he comes from a place between stars that has no name and never shall, but he knows of the void that the princes of hell worship because it birthed him too. And then the star in her chest begins to flare, and the Underking says that because Bryce made the drop outside of the illusion system, she still possesses some raw first light. Usually when people make the drop, it's within this system that the Asteri have, and that it takes their first light. They figure out that the Underking feeds on the souls of the dead. The energy is eaten. He tells them there's no judgment of the dead other than that their ritual of the sailing, which they say is worthy or not, if it tips and they get eaten by the Sobek, or if it goes all the way to the Underking in the Bone Quarter, has nothing to do with their worthiness, but only if the soul possesses enough residual power to make a hearty meal for himself and for the dead gate. He says their rituals are invented by their ancestors to endure the horror of the offering. So they find out that souls are being fed to the Underking and to the dead gate, and that is called second light. That the first light is what they produce when they make the drop, and that second light is what they feed off of when they die. He says Danica was there. Danica and all of the newly dead from the past several centuries are in the Bone Quarter, and that they're there just long enough for their living descendants and loved ones to forget about them, or long enough that they won't be asked about, that they won't come asking, that they dwell there in relative comfort until they're a nuisance or until he sends them into the gate sooner. But when they're forgotten, they're sent through the gate to become second light. They realize the sleeping city is a lie, that it's just to comfort the living, that the souls, when they die, they don't go to the Bone Quarter to sleep in some kind of comfort, but that they're fed on. And they realize the Underking is telling them all of this because he does not intend to let them leave there alive. And the Underking says, I should like to taste your light, Bryce Quinlan. And then he tries to kill her. And of course, then it jumps to another scene. So we see Rune, Ethan, and Cormac meeting the Ophian agent in an alley to pass the intel about the spine to them. But while they're hiding in the shadows, Mordock comes into the alley. And Mordock is a Dreadwolf, and he is the Hind's second in command. He is known to be this terrible Dreadwolf who kills tons of people, who's super powerful. Ethan tells them that Mordock was Danica's father. Rune stays hidden in the shadows as Cormac teleports Ethan out. Ethan also tells them that Mordock is a bloodhound and that he can scent them. So even though they're hidden in the shadows, Mordock can smell their scents. Mordock speaks into the alley and tells Rune that he can smell him, but he doesn't know who he is, but he knows that he's Fae. And then into the darkness, Mordock says he'll remember this scent. And then Cormac comes and teleports Rune out too. And then it goes back to the Bone Quarter, and Hunt and Bryce are being attacked by the Underking's Shepherd, which is a giant dog demon. All of a sudden it splits from one head into 3 separate hounds, and it hunts them. The Underking tells them that the shepherd was an experiment from the Prince of the Ravine, and it had been abandoned and forgotten in Midgard after the First Wars, and had been there in the Bone Quarter serving the Underking ever since. Then it jumps back to Cormac as he teleports Rune and Ethan into a bar far away from the old square so that there would be video proof of them far from the alley if Mordock claims they were there. Rune asks Ethan if he wants to move in with them, and then the Hind and the Harpy show up and sit by them. Back at the Bone Quarter, the 3 demon dogs have 24 reapers surrounding Bryce. She retrieves the Star Sword, and Hunt lands beside her, his power so strong it says it's rolling off of him, and had Bryce's hair floating up in the air. The lightning around him turned blue, like the hottest part of a flame, and Bryce realizes she's seen something that looks like this before, when it was carved in stone in the lobby of the Crescent City Ballet. So at the very beginning of the book, in chapter 1, she's at the Crescent City Ballet with her parents, and there's this lobby of all these pieces of artwork and these statues, and one of them is of a Fae male posed like an avenging god with a hammer raised to the sky. It's like capturing lightning and going into a sword. So when she sees Hunt like that, it triggers that memory, and with that thought, she has a half-formed theory, and all of a sudden jumps in front of Hunt's blast of power, extending the Star Sword so that the lightning hits it. And then it says the world erupted. Crazy. While fighting the demon dogs, Hunt realizes he can funnel first light from the dead gate, and he shoots it into Bryce, who channels it to her will into the Star Sword and plunges the sword into the skull of the dog, and the dog explodes into smithereens. But they know they're not safe, so they run for the river, and they see Therian there, random. He's on a wave skimmer waiting for them because he says he saw Hunt's lightning and thought they might need help. On their way escaping, Therian kills 3 Sobeks as they flee. He can use his power to make water a weapon, and then they make it back to the other side. But they don't stop when they make it back. They go all the way into her apartment where they're safe with wards. And they realize that Rune and Ethan should be there, but they can't get a hold of them. And then Hunt sees the news that Ephraim and the Hind and her Dreadwolves have arrived in the city. At the bar, the Hind reveals she knows things about Rune that she shouldn't know. He doesn't understand how she knows. She says the Autumn King suggested they meet, so she agreed, and that's why she's there. And then she riles up Ethan about Connor's death and accuses him of secretly pining for Bryce. Then before they leave, the Hind tells Rune to send Prince Cormac her love. It's a very interesting interaction where we meet the Hind and the Harpy for the first time, and we know them to be these awful people, but it also left me feeling like perhaps the Hind has some kind of abilities of like sensing things or reading minds or something to where she knows things about people that she shouldn't know. The book makes us want to believe that she just knows things because of her spy network, because she's a spy master. She has a lot of information, but part of me wonders if she has more powers than it's letting on. But I don't know. We'll see. So then Rune and Ethan go back to the apartment and they all tell what has happened to them. Hunt and Bryce say what happened to them in the bone quarter. Rune and Ethan say what happened to them. Then Hunt has to leave to be at the comitium because Celestina wants her Triari there for Ephraim's official arrival. And Rune says Bryce smells different, but he can't explain it. And then there's like this awkward scene where the Triari meets Ephraim, and Celestina and Ephraim are super awkward together. And then it goes back to Bryce's apartment and she tells them everything that happened in the bone quarter. They discuss the truth of what happens to souls turning into second light, and they wonder if there's anything they can do about it. Then someone knocks on Bryce's door and she opens it, and it's Sabine, and she immediately starts choking Bryce and calling her names, and she tells Bryce to stay out of wolf affairs, that no matter what the Prime had said, she was no wolf and neither was Ethan. Because remember, at the attack in the spring, when Bryce was running through the streets with Danica's sword, which is a wolf heirloom, and slaying demons, the Prime called Bryce a wolf. Back at the welcome party with the archangels, Hunt receives a message from Bryce that Sabine is there. Isaiah tells him to go, but as he's leaving, he sees Celestina notice him leaving and she's disappointed. So back with Bryce, Ethan is goading Sabine about sleeping with Mordok, and Bryce is shocked to learn that he is Danica's father. Ethan and Bryce exacerbate Sabine further by probing her about Danica being a rebel, about being afraid Bryce would use her standing to have Ethan replace her. Basically, they're just trying to rile her up. Then Hunt shows up and tells Sabine to leave, and Baxian is there with him. He had followed Hunt and stood with him against Sabine. She warns them about messing with Mordok, and then she leaves. Ethan tells Rune he'll move in with him, and then he leaves, and then Baxian asks why Sabine was there. He says he knows about Mordok and says being around the Hind all these years gave him a lot of information. He says when Mordok came to meet Danica that it didn't go well, and he warns them about him too. Baxian says he came because Hunt is his partner and seemed like he needed help. Then he leaves. Hunt feels bad that he left Celestina, but he stays there with Bryce. And then he and Bryce process everything that has happened that day, and Hunt says wherever Bryce's soul is headed after this life is where he wants to be too. More reasons for you to love Hunt. Then Rune and Day meet on their imaginary bridge after he falls asleep, and they have no real information for each other, but they just talk. She says he's the first person she's spoken to normally in a very long time, so long that she feels like she's losing her true self entirely. They talk about how her work is hard, that it wears on her, and that she has an influential family. They both talk about how they have parents that have mistreated them, and she reminds Rune that the rebellion relies on human resourcefulness and abilities because they can't rely on magic like her and Rune are used to. And they're both trying to figure out each other's identity. Then Ethan wonders how the Hind knew he had secret feelings for Bryce. He says that before Connor had died, when he met Bryce, he'd instantly wanted to marry her, and he even imagined her as the mother to his children. He says it's all history now, but he still doesn't know how to talk to her sometimes. I thought this was a very weird insertion to the story, that not only was Connor in love with Bryce, but then he died and now she has Hunt, but also Ethan had a thing for her. I just thought it was random, and I wonder why that was put in there. I don't know. And then Ethan summons Therian and asks him to take him to the bone quarter, that he needs to see if his brother is okay. Therian is like, I am not doing that. I'm not taking you to the bone quarter. But he says he has questions of his own, and they decide to go see the mystics. Then there's a scene where Bryce goes to a dance class with Juniper, and that she finds out that Juniper didn't get chosen for principal of the ballet because of her choice to stand up for the humans the day of the attacks, because when the attacks were happening and the bomb shelters opened, people were trying to close the doors before everyone could get in, and that people didn't care if humans got in or not, and Juniper stood up for the humans, trying to keep the doors open, saying the humans could get in, and that they remember that now, that she did that, and that she's being discriminated against for doing that. And this ticks Bryce off, and she is not happy about it, and this is the first time where she uses her title as the Princess of the Fae to get something. And so she calls the lady in charge of the ballet and threatens her if she doesn't make Juniper the principal, that bad things are going to happen. And then Celestina summons Hunt and reprimands him for leaving her party to go to Bryce's. She says Ephraim was offended and that it made her look bad in front of him, and she orders him to stay in the barracks for the next 2 weeks as a reminder of what his priorities should be. And then Hunt remembers meeting the Hind for the first time when he was owned by Sandriel. He says she had been so young, she was only in her 20s, that she had just made the drop and she had no deep well of magic, just the swiftness of a deer shifter and her love of cruelty, and that he was very confused by her appointment to such a high position, that it was a red flag for him to stay away from her. And he wonders why she was given this high position when she doesn't have any power, that there has to be something about her he doesn't know. And I still find that to be interesting, and that we're going to learn more about her, I think, too. So then he sees the Hind. She questions him about who he's been hanging out with and points out that it's an unusual group with a wide variety of species together, which isn't normal. And she wonders why they're all hanging out together in Bryce's apartment. And then when she sees Baxian, she stops short. And you wonder what history is between them, that they act like this towards each other. We don't know. So then Bryce, Therian, and Ethan go to the Mystics. And they are 3 beings who are submerged in water in these tanks, and they're wearing breathing masks. They have given up their life in the waking world to travel the universe and see things no one else will ever see. So they have some kind of special powers that allows their consciousness to travel to other universes. It's very bizarre. So Ethan asks the Mystics if Connor remains in the Bone Quarter or if his soul has passed through the Dead Gate. The person in charge of the Mystics is called the Astronomer, and he appears to them as this old, feeble man, but they aren't so sure. And he tells Ethan that to answer this question requires a riskier method of contact and will cost Ethan more. So to do this, he uses blood salt, which has blood from birth and from death, from the 2 transitions in and out of this world. And he puts the salt in the Mystic's tank. The tank turns red, and the Mystic takes them to hell. The Mystic says it's too dark to see, that it can only hear, and it asks about Connor Holstrom. Something answers saying wolves haven't roamed their lands for eons, and that no wolf by that name dwells there, living or dead. We find out that the Mystic is speaking with Thanatos, and this is our first time meeting him, and he is introduced as the Prince of the Ravine, another prince of hell. So Thanatos wants to know who sent the Mystic there and says he wants to see them. Thanatos sees them through the Mystic's eyes, and then they can see him too on this bizarre screen that is somehow happening with this whole system. He says he can smell the starlight on Bryce, and he realizes she's the one his brothers speak about. Ethan asks him about Connor. Thanatos says he's not there. He's upset with Bryce for killing the shepherd, who he said he had planted there as a link to Midgard. He said that the shepherd had been reporting everything he heard to Thanatos, that souls of the dead talk freely there, and he had learned a lot from them, and he's not happy that she killed him. But he says he'll give her answers out of respect for a warrior capable of slaying one of his creations. But he says if he ever meets her on the battlefield, he will take vengeance for Shepard's death. He tells them Connor is still in the Bone Quarter, that an order went out from the dark that he's to be left alone until the usual amount of time has passed, and only the Asteri would know if there is a way to help him and the other souls. Thanatos says he doesn't know who Emil Renast is. He thought that the Asteri had destroyed the threat of Thunderbirds long ago. Then he says he's getting tired of their questions and he's going to feast, that it's been a long time since a mortal came all the way down to hell, and that he will taste this one's soul as he once sipped from them like fine wine. Thanatos says he doesn't care for his brothers' agenda, and he doesn't follow their rules or restraints of civilization. And then things go crazy, and the Mystic is like seizing, and lights go out, and weird things are happening, and Ethan can't just stand by and let it happen. So he jumps down, he saves the Mystic from drowning. The Astronomer yells at him not to detach him from the system because their consciousness will be broken, that they can't just be taken out like that. But Ethan says they're going to drown if he doesn't, and so he takes them out. The Astronomer says they can't exist in this world anymore, that they don't even want to. And then Bryce, Therian, and Ethan leave, and they realize it was a bad idea, and Bryce is mad at Therian, accusing him of being a ruthless backstabber, because Therian was the one who brought up Emil Renast to Thanatos, and Bryce did not want him to do that because it was a secret, and she doesn't want it getting out that they're looking for him. And he tells her to have her family at the mercy of the River Queen and then come cry to him about morals, and she tells him her whole family is at the mercy of all Vanir. She tells him they're done working with him and to find someone else to drag into his mess. But then she turns around and Mordok is in the alley. Mordok calls out Ethan for being in the alley that day because he recognizes his scent, and for being a disgraced wolf. But then they leave Mordok in the alley, and Ethan is still unsettled about the answers he got about Connor, and he's not satisfied. He wants to know more. Back at the Comitium, Hunt spends some time with Baxian, just trying to help get him settled in, and he teaches him how to play a video game. And then he tells Bryce about his punishment to stay at the Comitium. Therian goes back to report to the River Queen to give her an update. He's starting to worry about what will happen after all of this, that the powers who take the place of the Asteri might not be good either, and he's wondering if it'll just be another new power to oppress everyone. In her training with Cormac, Bryce is having trouble accessing her power and using it to teleport or make shadows. She says she can feel the well of power in her star, but she can't access it. Declan calls her to come over because he found footage of Danica in Jessica's library looking at a specific book about the wolves' lineage. They find out that all of the lineage past 5,000 years ago has been erased in the historical records, and Bryce wants to know why and what it meant to Danica. So she goes to talk to the Prime, who tells her that after the things the wolves did in the first wars, they lost their true nature, and now they're pretty much enslaved to the Asteri. He says the wolves were careful to leave part of their lineage out of the history on purpose, but they passed it down through word of mouth. The Prime thought Danica was going to be the one to lead them back to what they were before the Asteri, and he had passed things down to her. Then Bryce tells him about Ethan being kicked out because he hadn't heard about it, and he is not happy. Then Cormac receives the news that the hit on the spine was successful, and the mech suit prototype and the ammunition are being sent to an island base 2 hours away for Pippa and her squadron to analyze, and he wants Therian and Hunt's help to keep her from gaining access. They're all willing to help the rebels because they like the idea of the Asteri not being in charge, but they also don't like Pippa because she's a psycho. So they're kind of in the middle of these two different sides. Then Juniper calls Bryce. She's ticked that Bryce used her status as a princess to get her appointed to principal. Everyone knows she got it because of her threat and not for her talent. And basically she's ticked and she's like, don't talk to me for now. Like, she needs time to cool off. Then Bryce goes to visit Celestina to ask if Hunt can leave his punishment at the barracks. She tells her that they had planned for him to go back to her hometown to visit her parents, which is a lie. She's using this as a cover because she needs him to help them at the island with the group to stop Pippa from getting this ammunition and the mech suit. Then Celestina agrees and tells her just take Hunt home after that and not bring him back because he's bringing down morale. Then Ethan gets a call from the Prime asking why he was kicked out of the pack, and he tells him about standing up for Bryce, and the Prime offers to make him an alpha of his own pack. He says he'll think about it. Then he goes back to the astronomer to get more answers about Connor, and when he does, he finds the female mystic on the floor alone. He realizes she's a wolf and even an alpha, and that she was forced to go to the astronomer when she was only 4 after her family realized she had the gift. She says by staying there, she supports her family and 10 siblings and she won't leave. She doesn't know when she was born or what year it is. She doesn't even know how long it's been since she made the drop. She says she never even had a name, and she never learned the names of her parents beyond mother and father. He tells her she shouldn't be there, that this isn't right, but she doesn't want to leave. He tells her his name and that he'll help her get out if she ever changes her mind, and it doesn't sit right with him to leave her there, but she refuses to go. He's so angry he can't stand by and do nothing, so since he can't take her, he steals the astronomer's ring that has fire sprites in it, and then he leaves. Then Rune meets Day on the bridge and they talk more. He tells her the hit on the spine was successful, and he tells her what they're planning on the island. She gets details from him because she's worried it's a trap, and while they're talking, she abruptly disappears, and Rune tries to go past her side of the bridge, but he's stopped by a wall because she seemed to be in danger and that she was in pain. And he realizes she's being intimate with someone, but she's not very happy about it, and he can sense pain. He's worried about her, but he doesn't know what's going on. So then he waits there for her, and when she returns, he asks if she's okay. She doesn't talk much about it, but she tells him that she hates the male she's with. No one knows it, but that she hates him and that he disgusts her, and she says she doesn't want to talk to Rune about him. He asks her to stay with him, that she makes him feel calm, and he likes being with her, and then they sleep on this Mayan bridge together on their separate couches. They just sleep there. So then they get to this island that's 2 hours away where they're trying to get this mech suit and ammunition from Pippa, but the cargo has already been handed over to her, and Cormac is ticked. She's been promoted to the head of the Valbaran front for Ophion, and they're not happy about that. She talks to them and she denies being the ones who tortured the victims that they found on the Istros, and she accuses them of all being too distracted in their own snake's nest to see the one among them who has a forked tongue. So she's implying what we don't know yet, but we're about to find out. She's implying that she knows knows what Bryce is doing with the Viper Queen and Emil. No one else knows it yet, and we don't even know it yet, but we're about to find it out too. Hunt realizes that the Asteri have figured out a way to make the Gorshin ore absorb magic instead of suppress it. Like, they have the manacles made out of Gorshin stone that nullifies your powers. When they put the Gorshin manacles on Hunt, or if they shoot somebody with a Gorshin bullet, it suppresses their power. And he says whenever he was enslaved, he knew that the Asteri was researching how to make it absorb power, and that they have figured it out. And they've created a suit so that they can draw first light from the power grid in the ground, and that this suit would be unstoppable. It would be capable of creating brimstone missiles right then and there. It would never run out of power or ammo because it would instantly suck first light out of the ground using the Gorshin ore. And he can tell what it is because there's purple veins in it. Hunt doesn't want either side of the war to have access to the suit. Seven Vanir had helped them transport this cargo from where it was, but Pippa has her people kill them simply for being Vanir, not caring that they helped them. And it just is giving us an example of Pippa being a psycho. Then Hunt uses his lightning to destroy the suit and all of the ammo, and in the chaos, Cormac is hit with a Gorshin bullet and he can't teleport anyone out. Bryce uses her light to blind everyone so they can escape, but when they get out of the cavern, they see Baxian in his hound form running along the cliffs as a warning, kind of warning them of what's coming ahead. And so they realize that the Hind, the Hammer, the Harpy, everyone is coming for the Ophion rebels, and now they're in the middle of this whole mess, and they need to get out so that their identities are not found. Cormac can't teleport them out because he's been shot with a Gorshin bullet. Rune says the sun is too bright for him to use his shadows, and Hunt can't use his powers because they're in water. It will fry everyone in the water. Bryce thinks she can still use her light because it could be more easily explained away compared to everyone else using their powers and being identified. So in the distance, they see the Hind, the Harpy, and the Hammer approaching on a speedboat. Then the Hind gets on a wave skimmer and comes ahead of everyone else. She gets to them and she makes a show of knowing who they all are. Then she throws a small white stone into the water, just like she did when she had Sophie Renest, and she tells them that she did this with Sophie, and that she tells them she's using it as a demonstration to show how deep the water is. If you sink, will you drown before you get to the bottom, or what will happen to you on the bottom? They're about to begin an attack on her when suddenly a submarine emerges from underwater and someone tells them all to get down the hatch. And the Hind retreats and they escape in the boat. They figure out they're in a city ship that belongs to the Ocean Queen's court beneath. When they get in there, Hunt has lost control of his power. Bryce calls it a rage daze, that his eyes, like he's out of it. And Rune says he's losing it in the way that only true mates can when their other is threatened, that there's no mercy in him at all, and Bryce doesn't know how to calm him down. So this is when Rune figures out that they're true mates. Back in Crescent City, Flynn, Declan, and Ethan had been left behind. Ethan brings the sprites that he stole from the astronomer back to Rune's house, and they free them from their rings. 3 of the sprites look like Lahaba, with flames shaped into female bodies, but one of the rings had been pure fire. It didn't look like a sprite like the others, but they release her too. And when the 4th ring is opened, a dragon comes out. They say it's a dragon in humanoid form. She's described as a naked, human-sized female, and she's sitting on the table charring it with crimson boiling eyes and red and gold scales beneath her skin. Random dragon entrance. And then it goes back to the submarine. We meet Commander Sendez, and she's the commander of this ship, and she tells them more about it. She says that it's fueled by the Ocean Queen's power, which gives them certain abilities, and it also keeps them from being tracked because it's not using any kind of energy but her power. She tells them that this boat has the squid ability to blend into its surroundings. So they go to a wall by the Ravel Canyon, and the Imperial Omega boat goes right past them. She tells them that the Ravel Canyon used to be a mere highway between big cities long ago. So they're learning more about their ancient history that they had not been told, things that happened before the Asteri. Sendez tells them they aren't aligned with Ophion or the Asteri, and then Medwitches come to take Cormac into surgery. In their boat, they have a biodome, which has like a garden. It makes its own fresh water, and she says she'll close it to the public so that Bryce and Hunt can have some privacy because they want Bryce to calm Hunt down. Then it goes back to Crescent City, and the sprites that Ethan freed are named Rithi, Milana, and Sasa. They are triplets, and they say they're descendants of Persian Falath, Lady of Cinders. The dragon is part of a modern family of her kind and is named Ariadne. Dragons are described more like mare than shifters, but are part of the House of Flame and Shadow. However, Ariadne's SPQM slave tattoo keeps her from the protections of her house, and it also keeps her from being able to shift into her dragon form without her owner's permission. She says when she does shift, that her owner can track her location wherever she goes while she's in her dragon form. Then she tells Ethan that the astronomer is an ancient sorcerer who's hiding behind the feeble old man facade, and that he favors the female wolf mystic and will never let her go. She tells them that he tortures them and tries to break them. Then back in the ship, Bryce knows Hunt has to release his power in order to come back from his rage, so she tells him to flow it into her. When he does and their magic merges, they both begin to glow. Then they're intimate and they end up teleporting from the biodome to the airlock. They figure out when they're together and their powers merge, it's like Hunt's power is charging her up and she teleports. And then it says that a piece of Bryce's starlight was left as a handprint on Hunt's chest, and it slowly dimmed. And he says he can still feel a kernel of her power inside of his chest. And I have a feeling this might be something in book 3, but we'll see. So then they go to Cormac, who's out of surgery, and he thinks her power merging with Hunt's was the key to teleporting, that maybe it isn't even Hunt specifically, but any energy that charges her up. That her power plays by unknown rules since it came from the gates. Hunt says the Prince of the Pit had told him about this, that they had no idea what their powers could do together. Commander Sendez comes in saying she heard Cormac mentioning Sophie Renast, and she tells them that they were summoned to rescue an agent from the North Sea weeks ago, and when they arrived they realized it was Sophie and that she had drowned by the time they arrived. So everyone thought Sophie might still be alive, but it turns out Sophie had died, that they didn't get there in time, but they were the ones who released her from her chains and they have her body. So they go to see Sophie's body, and when they see it, she has carved a code of letters and numbers into her bicep. Nobody knows what it means, but Cormac says everything Sophie did was for a reason. He grieves her death, and Sendez tells Therion that the Ocean Queen wants to overthrow the Asteri, but she has no intention of replacing them as the ruler. Ocean Queen simply remembers a time before the Asteri, when leaders were fairly elective, and she wants to return to that. Sendez questions why the River Queen would want Sophie's body, if not to reanimate it using a necromancer to turn her into a weapon and use her Thunderbird powers again. If they did that, it would be creating a weapon with no soul. These are breadcrumbs that are going to show up. Then while sleeping again, Rune meets with Day on the mine bridge. She was worried about him because she had heard about the attack on the rebel base. He asks why she's working with Ophion and tells her how Pippa had killed innocent Vanir in cold blood. She asks if Pippa herself did it. She had some of her people do it, and she says no one else has ever been able to muster a force with this strength against the Asteri before, and that she's willing to do some bad things so that one day her children and then their children will have freedom. Rune tells her he's not having kids because of what the Oracle told him. He tells her that the Oracle told him the royal bloodline would end with him, and then she tells him he'd be a good father. Then she tells him a story to help him fall asleep. We do not know why she tells this story or what its true meaning is, but she tells the story. There was a young witch who lived before Luna, Erd, Chthona, Solus, and Ojanus, which are their gods and goddesses. The young witch's mother loved her, but then a prince passed by and wanted her for his bride. She wanted only a true heart to love her, not his riches or kingdom, but he was determined, and he chased her with his hounds. Then the forest that had helped raise her turned her into different animals to escape him each time, but the prince was able to stop her each time. So they turned her into a deer, a fish, a bird, and then finally when she was a bird, she was struck with his arrow. The forest turned her into a monster with claws and fangs and bloodlust, and she ripped the prince and his hounds to shreds. And she says that's the end of the story. And it was very bizarre. When they return from beneath, they're all shocked that everyone isn't waiting for them to be taken in. They think the Hind will have told everyone she saw them and that they're all about to be punished big time. Hunt starts to think the Hind is keeping it to herself for now to see what they do next. And they still don't know anything about the intel or how it ties to Danica, and he thinks maybe the Hind is trying to figure out if they know the intel too. Then Baxian shows up asking how they called that ship and says he wants in on whatever they're doing. He tells tells them he's a rebel sympathizer. And they're like, why are you trusting us? We could turn you in immediately. But he doesn't believe them. They act like they don't know what he's talking about. And then he's like, once you figure out what's going on, come find me because I want in on everything. And then he leaves. As soon as Hunt and Bryce are alone, he calls her out for knowing something about Emil. He knows she sent him to the Viper Queen. And then the chapter ends. And it goes to Flynn, Declan, and Ethan, where they introduce Rune to the sprites in Ariadne. Then it jumps again to Bryce and Hunt going to the meat market to see Emil. Bryce had made a deal with the Viper Queen to find Emil by any means necessary in exchange for owing her a favor. They tell Emil that Sophie is dead, and he tells them she didn't tell him any intel, but he recognizes the name Danica. He says Danica found Sophie using her bloodhound powers and that she needed Sophie to do something for her, something she couldn't do because she was recognizable. Bryce shows Emil the code that Sophie had carved into her arm before she drowned, but he doesn't recognize it. Then Fury shows up to take Emil to Bryce's parents in Nidaros. Bryce has set up for them to adopt him, and they gave him a new name and identity. And then Fury takes him. Hunt and Bryce argue that Bryce had kept this from him. Bryce also tells Hunt, and everyone finds out Emil doesn't actually have powers, that only Sophie was a Thunderbird and she had been the one to sink the Omegas that day, and that Emil is just a human boy. Then Rune calls Bryce to his house to see the sprites in the dragon Ariadne. Bryce tells the sprites about Lahaba, and they want her to tell their queen the story. They believe their queen had been sold to an Asteri. Ariadne says that she costs more than even a prince and princess can afford, that she had been a gift from an archangel to the astronomer, and Ariadne asks why they would help her. Bryce says because her mate was a slave and she can't turn a blind eye to it anymore. Bryce calls Jessica, asking for her to talk to the astronomer and convince him to let her friends keep all of them. She says she will because he owes her a favor, and now so does Bryce. Jessica implies that she knows of Ariadne. She says something like, oh, so that's what she's calling herself, but nothing more. Every time we see Jessica, I'm like, what? Who are you? Then she sends Bryce an envelope with information about dragonfire, and she learns that the dragon is so valuable because dragonfire is one of the few substances that's proven to harm the princes of hell and can even burn the prince of the pit. So Hunt meets with Celestina, and she congratulates him on mating with Bryce. She had been able to tell because of his scent. He lies to her about going to visit Bryce's parents. Celestina wants Hunt to look into reports about demon activity at the Northern Rift. He knows that hell is planning something based off of the types of demons that were caught and the breeds and the frequency of how much they were coming through. And he knows something is stirring based off of these reports and what Apollyon had told him. He goes to find the Hind in the barracks and asks her what she's going to do about seeing them yesterday. So she acts like she didn't see them and she doesn't know what's going on, and Hunt thinks that's really weird and tells him to go see what the Harpy did at the Angel's Gate. She had mutilated 2 rebels by cutting through their ribs on their back and pulling their lungs out, symbolizing a pair of bloody wings while they were still alive, and they call it being blood-eagled. He is upset that Celestina allowed this to happen in their city. Therian goes back and updates the River Queen on the Ocean Queen's fleet of ships that can elude the Asteri's Omega boats. They had wanted their ships to be kept a secret, but he felt like it was the only way he could get away with not having captured Pippa Spetsos or any answers about Emil, so he tells her the Ocean Queen's secrets about having these city ships. Then Queen Hypaxia comes to visit Rune, and she asks for him to give her an escort while she's in Lunathian for the mating ceremony, and she's worried that her coven might try to harm her so she can be replaced by her sister, because they don't trust her as a half necromancer. The coven wants a closer bond with the Asteri, but Hypaxia doesn't. Rune assigns Ethan to be her guard. Then Hunt tells Therian about the demon reports from the Northern Rift and that Emil is somewhere safe and to call off the search. Hunt also tells him Emil has no powers and threatens him if he tries to find out anything else about Emil. Therian plans to keep dragging out the investigation so he can keep coming above. He doesn't want to tell the River Queen yet. Ethan had overheard Hypaxia and Rune's conversation that she is a necromancer, and he asks if she can contact his brother Connor. Hypaxia says she can perform a ritual on the autumnal equinox when the veil between the realms is thinnest. She already knew the truth about Second Light because she can speak to the dead. Rune thinks about assigning Ariadne with Hypaxia also as an official excuse for commandeering her from the astronomer. Then Hunt goes to the Fae archives to research the demons from the report. He's worried Adis plans to use Bryce and the Horn to open the rift. Hunt and Bryce make up and get together again, but they don't teleport this time. Day warns Rune that Pippa and the rebels are planning a big retaliation against the rogue group of rebels who sabotage them, and warns him to be careful. So there's a lot going on at one time with all these different characters. While Bryce is at work, the Autumn King comes to visit her and asks why she mated with Hunt when she's betrothed to Cormac. She asks why he cares about her well-being and that he never has before, and he says that when he was watching Micah hurt her at the summit that he couldn't stand it, and that he arranged the marriage to Cormac So she would be protected in a Valen because the magic that guards it is so old, even the Asteri can't enter without permission. I found this to be a very interesting fact, and I want to know why, and I feel like they're going to use that somehow. He also tells her that when she used her standing as a princess to the Crescent City Ballet and to the astronomer, that she bought influence with the royal bloodline and she acknowledged her place as a princess. And so since she did that, now she's officially part of the royal bloodline, and he completed the legal paperwork to make it official and changed her name to Bryce Adelaide Dannon. While he's there, he sees a picture of the code on Sophie's arm and tells her he knows what she's looking for and that he's also been looking for it for a long time. And he's referring to the truth. He says he's been looking for the truth for a long time and that that's what Sophie's code is getting her to. So then Bryce calls Hypaxia for someone to talk to about becoming a princess. Hypaxia says only the Asteri can stop her father, and that's what Bryce was worried about. Hypaxia tells her that she had plans to be with the one that she loved, but that now it's not possible, and we don't know who she's talking about. She agreed to the engagement with Rune to keep her coven from gaining too much power, but she's not interested in him. And then remember, earlier we found out that Hypaxia was raised by ghosts. With her necromancy powers, they had raised ancient tutors from the dead. She considers those tutors that raised her to be her family, and that they were alive before the Asteri ever came here, back when humans lived in Parthos. She tells Bryce that before the Asteri, souls died and went to a peaceful place, not herded into places like the Bone Quarter. Hypaxia had found a way for her mother's soul to rest in peace, instead of going to the Bone Quarter. But in sending her there, she sacrificed the ability to ever speak to her again. Hypaxia tells Bryce that the power of the witches has slowly been weakening, like it's being siphoned away, and her coven only wants to get closer with the Asteri while she does not. And Hypaxia tells Bryce it can be very lonely to wear a crown and that she's glad she has Bryce to talk to. Suddenly, a massive scaled beast attacks Ethan, ripping his throat out. Bryce immediately recognizes the beast as a demon and tells Hypaxia to shoot her power into Bryce to give her a charge. Bryce and Hypaxia work together to defeat the demons. Using Hypaxia's charge, Bryce teleports to Ethan, takes his gun, kills one of the demons, and uses the rest of the energy from Hypaxia to teleport around, setting the demon up into a trap for Hypaxia to stab it with her knife. Meanwhile, Ethan is like bleeding out on the ground. But when Hunt arrives, he tells them they are Deathstalker demons. They think it was either Hypaxia's coven who summoned them to kill her, or Apollyon himself trying to test Bryce out as a worthy opponent. Ariadne had been positioned on the roof, but bailed as soon as Hypaxia went in the pizza shop before the demons even arrived. Rune tells everyone the news about Bryce officially becoming a princess since she used the royal name, and now Hunt is his brother and son-in-law to the Autumn King, also making Hunt a prince. Then Hypaxia heals Ethan, and when he wakes up, he asks her if she can ensure that his brother Connor doesn't go to one of the sleeping realms like she did for her mother, and she says she'll do her best. Rune tells Bryce to tread carefully about laws and rules she doesn't know about, and Bryce says if it's a princess her dad wants, it's a princess he'll get, with a suspicious look. And several times when Bryce is like scheming things like this, it describes her as looking the most like his father that he'd ever seen. They describe her to be looking like the Autumn King, and I think that's interesting. Therian visits Hypaxia, and we find out that they had become friends at the summit, and she's one of the few people who knows he's betrothed to the River Queen's daughter. Therian is considering abandoning his post and seeking asylum with the Ocean Queen, and then he asks Rune and the guys if he can stay at their house. In the next chapter, Bryce kind of loses it about becoming a princess. She breaks down to Hunt, crying. She did not want any of this. She says she can handle the magic and the Starborn stuff, but she can't handle this. And she feels like the Autumn King owns her now, that he could marry her to Cormac tomorrow, or he could approve or deny a divorce. Everything was up to him. Hunt says he'll kill him, and Bryce says that'll just get him executed. Bryce says she thinks she has an idea, but Hunt isn't going to like it. Then we see meeting with Day again on the bridge, and she apologizes for how she acted the last time. She says he's her only friend, and they make a plan to meet at the autumnal equinox at the ball for the archangels. It jumps to 2 weeks later, and everyone is headed to the ball. Bryce has followed a long list of orders from the Autumn King about what she can wear, how she's supposed to act, what she can eat, and she's expected to accompany Cormac. So she arrives to the ball with Cormac, with Hunt close behind. She walks straight up to the archangels and announces her mating to Hunt. When she walks up to them, Celestina congratulates her, and Bryce says, "Thank you, Prince Hunt Hunt and I will be very happy together. To everyone's shock, she publicly announces Hunt as her mate and her prince, a prince of the Fae. Cormac and the Autumn King play along to avoid embarrassment. Then the Asteri appear on a screen, 6 seated in their thrones and 1 left empty, as always, in honor to their fallen sister who was killed by Apollyon. Rigelus congratulates Celestina and Ephraim on their mating and wishes them fertility, and Rigelus also congratulates Princess Bryce Dannon and Prince Hunt Athalar. Bryce questions how they already knew, and she realizes that they must have cameras watching them at all times. Then the Autumn King presents her to the Asteri and Bryce bows to them. Because of her public declaration, she was now Hunt's property instead of the Autumn King or Cormac's. Bryce starts to question if Rigelus knows everything she's done these past weeks based off of the way that he's looking at her. And then the Asteri's screen goes dark and everyone continues the ball. Bryce and Hunt dance and her star gleams. Hunt tells her that everything that ever happened to him was all so he could meet her and be there with her, and he tells her that he's hers forever. Rune goes with Hypaxia to meet her sister the Hind for the first time. Hypaxia is kind to the Hind, but the Hind is cold back to her. Rune leaves them to talk and goes to his meeting place with Day, and when he gets there, the Harpy is there waiting, and he's nervous that it's the Harpy, and he doesn't want it to be the Harpy. So he says their code, which is Day, and she's supposed to respond with night, but she says, what's that supposed to mean? So he knows it isn't her, but her presence spooks him away from staying to wait for Day because he doesn't want her to get caught, and so he leaves. It was 2 minutes past their meeting time, so he decides she isn't coming and that he'll explain it to her later, and then as he's leaving, in the shadows at the top of the stairs, he sees that the Hind is also there watching them, and he leaves the ball after coming close to being caught by the Harpy and the Hind. Hunt and Bryce sneak away to be alone together in a cloakroom, but when they open it, they find Celestina and Hypaxia in there getting busy as well. They're like half naked and kissing, and they realize that they are lovers. Then everyone gets tense, their powers surging, just waiting to see what will happen. But Bryce talks to them, saying that she'll keep quiet and she considers them her allies. She'll stand with them if they ever decide to stand against the Asteri. So then she leaves, and Celestina asks Hunt why he was willing to accept the title of prince, knowing it in itself is also a form of enslavement. He tells her that Bryce was worth accepting the title of prince, and she tells Hunt that love is a trap, one that she can't figure out how to free herself from, and that she wishes to be freed from it. Also at the ball, Therian is there with the River Queen's daughter, and he's getting tired of stringing her along. Finally, he sends her to dance with one of her guards, and he goes to the bar to talk to someone else. He's willing to risk the consequences because he can't bear to lead her on anymore. Ethan and Hypaxia leave the ball and begin the ritual to contact Connor. Day and Rune meet on the bridge, and she says that she saw him at the fountain and that she knows who he is, that she was there too and saw him and the threat. They talk about him being a Fae prince and what he would do if she was someone that he hates. He says it would be an adjustment. They talk about how he's betrothed to Queen Hypaxia, and he tells her that they have no feelings for each other and it's complicated. He tells her that he watched the clock the whole night waiting to see her, and then he kisses her. He pulls back his disguise, revealing his face to her, and she kisses him again. She says he reminds her why she's alive and reminds her that goodness exists in the world. But again, like before, she's pulled away from the partner she's sleeping with in person, and she apologizes to him as she leaves. Then it shows Hunt and Bryce, and they got drunk at a bar after the ball. They come back home, they sleep together again, and this time they teleport to her building's roof in the process. So back to Hypaxia and Ethan. During the ritual to summon Connor, the Underking arrives instead of Connor. He tells Ethan that Connor is fine, but his well-being depends on what Ethan does next. He says that the House of Flame and Shadow has been very interested in Hypaxia's power, and so he tests her by disappearing and then surrounding them with a labyrinth of wards, and sends the hounds of the House of Flame and Shadow on the outside of the wards, trapping them inside to try to get out. He's trying to see what level of powers Hypaxia has. Bryce is visited by Apollyon in a dream. He can only contact her on this night because that's when the veil is the thinnest, but that he is able to contact Hunt anytime because he was bred to be receptive to his kind. And you're like, what? He tells her that Thea was Adis's great love, and that killing Pelias and eventually Sirius the Asteri was all for Adis, and that it was his fault they lost that phase of the war. Apollyon tells Bryce that Adis and Thea were not enemies but allies, that Thea and some of her Fae forces allied with them against the Asteri. He says he's telling her all of this because she's racing to her doom. He asks her to open the doors to hell using the horn. When she says no, he tells her to come find him in hell when she learns the truth, and then he leaves. When Bryce wakes up, she tells everyone what Apollyon said, but they all question what the truth is because they've been told something different their their whole lives. And she practices teleporting and using less energy each time so she can hold on to the power longer. They think all of her powers besides the starlight require another source of energy. Cormac is there helping to train her, but he's still not happy about what she did at the ball. He's only there so that Rune will keep communicating with Agent Daybright, and he hasn't forgiven her. She caused a lot of trouble with his dad. When he realizes she has more secrets, he holds her with a knife on her throat until she tells him what's going on. She finally tells him and everyone else that Emil was with the Viper Queen, but that he's safe now and he has no powers. Cormac apologizes for drawing a knife on her and they keep training. So everything gets tense for a second when Cormac draws a knife because we're like, what the heck is he doing? She decides if they all use their powers, everyone's just going to get hurt. So she tells them a version of the truth, but not the whole truth. She can tell that Hunt is proud of her for diffusing the situation without fighting. Ethan and Hypaxia show up and tell all of them that they'd spent the entire night escaping a labyrinth of wards from the Underking, that if Rune and Bryce don't meet the Underking at Erd's temple, that he'll throw Connor and the pack through the gate and turn them into Second Light. Therion's in the meat market pretending to look for Emil, and while he's there, he hears gossip about a dragon that was fighting for the Viper Queen. He calls Flynn as backup, and they go to the Viper Queen to find Ariadne. Therion wants her for himself to give to the River Queen because he's afraid of what she'll do when he doesn't return with Emil and when she finds out that he stepped out on her daughter. He's starting to get nervous for the consequences of his choices, but at the same time, he doesn't want to serve her any longer. So Therion asks the Viper Queen for information, and she says in exchange for him spinning a story to the astronomer that will allow Ariadne to stay, she'll tell him what she knows. Then Flynn tells Ariadne he's coming back for her. When he agrees to tell the astronomer a story, the Viper Queen says something is happening with his friends and that he needs to call them to warn them. Bryce, Hunt, Rune, and Hypaxia go to Erd's temple to meet the Underking. He summoned them because he wanted to tell them that the Reapers they had accused him of sending come from the Eternal City, which means from the Asteri. Bryce asks him if Jessica spoke to him. She assumes he knows her since she had several death marks. He says he doesn't know her by that name, but that he knows of her. Just more things about Jessica that make you wonder. Then he tells Hypaxia that she did well working through the labyrinth and that very few would be able to do that, and he tells her that the House of Flame and Shadow will welcome her. Then they realize he also called them there because he was working with Pippa to set up a trap to kill them. So he disappears and they're trapped inside the temple with Pippa and her Lightfall squadron outside firing on them. Hunt charges Bryce with his power and she starts teleporting. First, she teleports to the gates and she makes an announcement that Ophion is attacking Erd's temple, and then she started teleporting them all out. By the time she teleports Hypaxia and Rune, she has nothing left. Her nose starts to bleed, they realize that they're trapped, and right at the last minute, Baxian appears from behind the throne and leads them through a secret passageway. In the tunnels, Bryce turns on Baxian, questioning why he's always showing up where they are, and he claims he was Danica's mate, and he has a tattoo in her handwriting of "True love, all is possible" on his chest, which is like Danica's signature phrase for Bryce. Bryce doesn't believe him. She accuses him of lying, and he tells her that he loved Danica more than anything, that they met when Danica came to Pangera for a gathering of Pangeran and Valvaran wolves, that she sought him out for information about his shifter ancestry because his is unique. When they saw each other, they instantly realized they were mates. Baxian says he has very old ancestry that manifested in him after years of lying dormant, and that Danica had found a family tree that traced all the way to Baxian, and she had questions for him. He had no new answers for her, but they became close when they knew they were mates. They had been secretly meeting once a month for 2 years, and he says Sabine knows, and that's why she avoids him, because he saw how she treated Danica and he didn't put up with it, so she's afraid of him. He thinks the synth was a cover for something else, that Danica actually died because of the research she had been doing. She wanted to know where everyone came from, what they'd once been, and if it could inform their future. She had a feeling she was going to die, and she wanted an alternative to Sabine as a leader for the wolves. Then after she met Baxian, she started searching for a way into a world where they could be together, since they knew there was no way Sabine and Sandriel or even the Asteri would ever allow them to be together. He says Danica never told anyone about them because she was afraid the Asteri would use him against her to keep her in line if they ever found out about them. They accuse him of lying to gain their trust. He gives them more details as proof, and Hunt realizes that this is why Baxian's behavior has changed since he knew him before, that after he met Danica, he tried to make things right. Bryce asks how Danica knew Sophie Renast. He said Danica learned about her existence while researching Thunderbird lineage. He thinks Danica had theories about the Thunderbird's power. When she asks about Sophie carving a series of numbers and letters on herself while she was dying, he tells her the code before she even tells him. It's a number of a room in the Asteri archives. The code is a system system that they use for numbering rooms there. He knows it because he was the one who gave it to Danica. On a visit to the Asteri Palace, Sandriel made him escort her, and they took her to the archives, and he saw them go through a door with that label. And when Sandriel came out, she was pale, and he noticed it enough to remember the number and pass it on to Danica. She became obsessed with it. She had theories about what was in there, and she thought it was something that would alter the very world. She needed Sophie to go in because she was too recognizable. And it took Sophie 3 years undercover to finally gain entrance as an archivist. When she did, she went to Kavala soon after. Hunt thinks whatever is in that room is the intel that Sophie used as leverage against Ophion and the Asteri. They decide to see if Declan can find anything for them. So they go straight to Declan, and he isn't able to break into the archive system, but he gets into the palace's camera system, and he's able to find footage of Sophie as an archivist entering the marked room 2 months prior to her death. She stays in there for 15 minutes and comes out with her face white as a sheet. So Bryce says they need to get in there and find out what was so important that it could possibly change the world. And everyone is shook because they don't want to do that, because they know the risks. Therian tells Ethan that he needs to finish any unresolved business he has with anyone before they go to the Eternal City, just in case. And Ethan gets up and leaves to go do something. Then Bryce meets with Fury and asks her if she has any information on the Asteri Palace. Fury thinks she's crazy, but she agrees to give it to her. She takes Syrinx and Juniper, and she says she's leaving the city to lie low. She's worked for both sides, and she doesn't agree with either of them, and she doesn't think Bryce's life is worth giving to either of them. Bryce says she's not fighting for either side, but she's fighting for the truth. Then Therian breaks his engagement with the River Queen's daughter, and she's not surprised. She says she knew he didn't have a true heart and that he never did, and then she goes to tell her mother. Therian knows he has less than 30 minutes until he's hauled back into the Blue Court and never would be allowed to leave again. And he couldn't do that. He loves being above. He does not want to live underwater. The only thing he can think of to do is to go to the Viper Queen. He knows she's the only one who would stand against the River Queen and survive. So it jumps back to Ethan, and his unresolved business was to go to the Prime of the Wolves to tell him that the mystic the astronomer has is a wolf and an alpha, and that they need to do something about it. Sabine says it's not their problem, but when she leaves, the Prime asks what the mystic looks like and asks Ethan about her scent. The Prime says that Sabine is not the only Fendir heir. This mystic is another heir to the Fendir line. So Therian makes it to the Viper Queen with just minutes to spare before he's hauled back beneath. He immediately offers himself to her, but she gives him the option to defect from his house and become a part of hers. So he defects from the House of Many Waters by drinking her blood. But when he does, her venom burns his throat and his heart, and that cold erupted through him. And he feels like something is different, but he doesn't know what. Then she says after he helps his friends, he is to return to her, start being a fighter for her. So as he's leaving, he can feel like an invisible leash tying him back there no matter where he goes. Then it goes back to Ethan. He's worried about the mystic because he's afraid that Sabine knows or suspects she's a Fendir heir. So he tells Hypaxia he has to stay to guard her and to tell everyone he can't go with them, but not to tell them that the mystic is a Fendir heir because he doesn't want to distract them from the mission. So he leaves and goes to guard her outside of the astronomer's place. Then we see Rune and Day on the bridge again, and she tells him she can't do this with him anymore, that it's too reckless and she can't risk everything she's sacrificed to get where she is. He says he'll find her one day, and they kiss, and then they do more. And then after that, he tells her that they're going to break into the Asteri archives, and she warns him that they will kill him. But before she can say anything else, she's pulled away and says they know, and mentions the dungeons. So Rune thinks she's been discovered and taken to the Asteri dungeons. So Rune goes to Hunt and Bryce and tells them and says he's coming with them inside the palace because Day's been found out and taken to the dungeons, and he tells them he has a relationship with her and he's willing to risk it all to go save her. At the same time, Cormac tells them that Pippa is planning a raid on the Pangeran lab where the Asteri scientists created the mech suit prototype. Rune, Hunt, and Bryce need a distraction while they're in the Asteri's palace, so they make a plan for Therian and Cormac to go to the lab where Pippa was planning on going to give the distraction that they need. Then when Therian gets there to talk to them, Bryce immediately notices that something is off. She says his scent is different and his eyes aren't quite right, but she can't place it and she moves on. Before she leaves, Bryce tries to call Juniper, but she doesn't answer, so she leaves an audio mail apologizing and saying she loves her. She folds up the picture of the four of them and puts it in her phone case. I just wonder, since we know what happens to her at the end of this book and where she ends up, if she has her phone with her and for some reason she's going to need this picture where she is at. I don't know. I'm just wondering, especially because there's a picture of Fury on it and we know there's some connection with Fury, maybe. So everyone is preparing to head to Pangea, and Rune finds Cormac at a bar, and he's quiet. He says he doesn't know how Rune's father didn't break the kindness in him that his father had broken his own. Cormac apologizes for trying to kill Rune and his friends during his ordeal, and Rune tells him after all of this they can start over. Then Hunt goes back to the barracks to clean out his things and get all of his weapons and his Umbra Mortis helmet. On his way out, he sees Celestina. She's at the elevator bay watching him, even though it's very early in the morning and no one else is there. She tells him she hopes they'll come to her if they need an ally, and then he leaves. They plan to get to Pangea using the Ocean Queen's city ship the next day. So then it jumps to Tharion and Cormac are headed to the lab. Tharion keeps mentioning that he can feel the invisible tether linking the remains of his cold heart to the Viper Queen of Valbara. And while they're on their way to the lab, he says he only has 5 hours to submerge in water again before it's too late to maintain his fins, and they're 2 hours away from the coast. They make it past the checkpoints and they see that Pippa and her people are already there at the lab. Cormac teleports to Rune, Bryce, and Hunt, who are outside of the palace, and he begins teleporting each one of them into their palace. While Rune and Bryce are waiting their turn, Rune tells her that after all of this, he thinks she needs to make a move against the Autumn King and become the Autumn Queen, since she outranks him in power. When Cormac comes back, he tells her that he agrees and that he's realized what his oracle told him didn't mean he should marry Bryce, but that their union as allies in this rebellion would bring prosperity to their people. Then Cormac takes Rune and Bryce to the palace, and they're all three there. They have to stand there in a hallway for 5 long minutes to hear from Tharion when things start happening at the lab so that Bryce can go. When they get the all clear, Hunt energizes Bryce and she teleports into the archives room to find the truth. When she teleports into the room that Sophie had marked for them, she realizes she's in a spiral staircase. At the bottom of the stairs is a long hallway. She describes it as 70 feet long and 14 feet wide. She only sees 7 crystal pipes shooting upward with plaques beneath them and small black screens beside the pipes. Each plaque has the name of an asteri, and then it lists them all. It says Hesperus, the evening star; Polaris, the northern star; Eosphoros, Octardus, Austria, and Sirius, who was the asteri killed by Apollyon, and then the last one is Rigellus, the bright hand. Bryce realizes she's standing on a crystal floor, and suddenly a flare of first light passes by, shooting up one of the 6 pipes. The screen next to Rigellus' name brightens and says Rigellus power level 65%, and then the one beside it reads Austrus power level 76%. Bryce realizes that the asteri are feeding on their first light, that they need first light to survive, and that the entire palace was built of the same quartz that the gates were. All of it is a conduit for power. From Fury's map, she knows that she's 7 levels below the throne room. She wonders if the first light goes up straight to their crystal thrones, filling them with power and recharging them like batteries, sucking up first light. She realizes that all the power from all of the drops that were made, the second light from people who have died, everything was taken by the asteri and used to control its citizens. They are all just food for the asteri, a never-ending supply of power. She realizes that this is what Sophie had learned, and that the asteri may not even possess holy stars in their chests as they have claimed, but they're fueled by first light stolen from their people. She figures if she cuts off the first light, she can destroy the funnel of power and destroy the asteri. Back with Hunt, he's getting nervous because Bryce is running out of time. Rune is also getting antsy, and he says he doesn't wait any longer, and he goes on ahead to look for Day in the dungeons, and Hunt says they'll find him. Back at Bryce, she knows she's been gone too long, but she knows she has to learn more, and that this might be the only chance she ever gets to be in the archives. She starts to explore a little bit, and she finds a room labeled Dusk, and she enters it, remembering Danica's note about Dusk's truth. Hunt stays where he is, even though Bryce is late, because he'd received a message from Declan that she was okay and in a room called Dusk. He regrets not having made Bryce bring him with her. At this point, Rune has already been gone for 3 minutes. So Rune is racing down the halls, but it's too quiet and there are no guards, and he's getting suspicious. He goes to the dungeons and starts to hear screams, and as he's continuing, Mordok steps in his path. Back at the lab, Tharion is racing behind Cormac as he's throwing balls of fire into the lab, trying to burn everything down. Tharion is intercepting parts of exploding machines with walls of water. He says the doctor had led them straight into the lab, and Cormac immediately shot the doctor in the head as soon as they were in, and then killed all of the scientists and engineers around them. Tharion was surprised because he thought they were limiting casualties, so he thinks Cormac has lost it. He says Cormac ignores him and has gone rogue. Then Pippa shows up and points a gun at Cormac and says she's been looking forward to this, and right as she shoots her rifle, Cormac Cormac tries to teleport, but because he's so drained from teleporting everyone at the palace, he's too slow and he's shot in the shoulder, blood spraying everywhere right before he teleports. Cormac yells at Tharion to get out of there, and that's when Tharion realizes that from his tone and the look that he's giving, that Cormac never intended to get out of the lab alive, and he was willing to die. So in the door marked dusk, Bryce sees a round table with 7 seats and a projector in the center. On the walls are paper star maps showing constellations and solar systems, all marked with notations and pinned with red dots. She reads the map and realizes they are cataloging worlds that have been conquered by the Asteri, with notes about their use of First Light and how they either lost or controlled these worlds and fed on them until there was nothing left. She finds a map of Midgard that says conquered AE 17,003. She doesn't know what AE means, but she knows if they've been on Midgard for 15,000 years, then they've existed in the cosmos for far, far longer than that. She wonders how many Asteri exist beyond the 6 that she knows about, and she reads the notes about Midgard. They have located an ideal world. The indigenous life not sustainable, but the conditions are primed for colonization. It says they have contacted others to share bounties. Then beside a drawing of a mare next to a sketch of a wolf shifter was a note that said the aquatic shifters can hold a hybrid form far more easily than those on land. Next to a drawing of a fey female, it says they did not see the old enemy who offered a hand through space and time, like a fish to bait. They came, and they opened the gates to us willingly. They walked through them to Midgard at our invitation, leaving behind the world they knew. Bryce realizes that all of their species living on Midgard had been lured to this world from the Asteri from other planets, using the northern or southern rifts or some other way that they had to travel between worlds, and that they'd been drawn here to be fed off of forever. So Bryce turns on the projector and she sees a 3D map of the cosmos, like stars and planets and nebulas, a digital orrery like the one the Autumn King has and the one the astronomer has. Bryce touched one of the worlds and a note appeared telling the name of it, Organis. Children were ideal nutrition, adults incompatible. All that was left of this world was a note about if they're people made for good eating or not. And she's starting to lose it. So she looks and she finds Hell and sees a note next to Hell that says Hell, lost, AE 17,001, with the note, a dark cold world with mighty creatures of night. They saw through our lures. Once warring factions, the royal armies of hell united and marched against us. We were overwhelmed and abandoned their world, but they gave chase. They learned from our captain lieutenants how to slip between the cracks in realms, and they found us on Midgard in 17,002, tried to convince our lured prey of what we were, and some fell to their charms. We lost a third of our meals to them. War lasted until nearly the end of 17,003. They were defeated and sent back to hell, far too dangerous to allow them access to this world again, though they may try. They developed attachments to the Midgard colonists. Bryce knows this means Thea. She realizes that the demon princes had felt a moral obligation to chase after the Asteri so that they may never prey upon another world. Bryce continues searching through planets, looking for the Asteri's home world. She wants to find it and tell the princes of hell about it, so once they're done beating them in Midgard, they can go destroy the Asteri's home world. She says hell had continued trying to save them for 15,000 years and had never stopped trying. Then Rigulus appears and tells her she won't find their home world because even they have forgotten where its ruins lie. And she turns and she tells him she is going to kill him. But Rigulus just laughs and says he thought she was only there to access the information Sophie Renast and Danica Findir died for. And she realizes he knows far more than she thought. And she asks why they're doing any of this. He tells her that they are higher beings, they are gods, and their power is the source of the Asteri's nutrition. They even let the humans live just to give the Vanir someone to rule over. He heard her audio mail to Juniper and knew she was coming here just as he had planned, and he wants her there to reopen the rifts. Rigulus has set this whole thing up. He tells that her ancestors created the horn and another fey object that allowed them to enter this world, that they were stolen from their original masters, his people. He says his people had built fearsome warriors in that world to be their army, all prototypes for the angels in this one, and all of them traitors to their creators, joining the Fae to overthrow his brothers and sisters 1,000 years before they arrived on Midgard. If you're anything like me, you're like working as hard as you can to try to remember every Sarah J. Maas book that you've read and figure out who the heck he's talking about and whose history he's telling us that we can't remember. So he tells her that Midgard is a base, that they opened the doors to other worlds to lure their citizens here looking to conquer a new planet, not realizing that they were their new conquerors. They also opened the door doors so they could conquer those other worlds as well. And the Fae, Queen Thea and her 2 daughters, realized it too late. Her people were already here, but they found the hidden access points in their world. The Asteri opened these doors so that people would come to this world and they could feed off of them, and then he wanted access to their worlds that they could go to and conquer as well. So they had hidden access points on Midgard to be able to get to these places, and that Thea and her 2 daughters found these, and they shut the gates to stop them from invading their realm, in the process shutting the gate to all other worlds too, including their allies in hell. And the Asteri have been trapped there ever since, cut off from the cosmos. So whatever way that he had to travel in the cosmos was closed by Thea and her daughters, and he believes that they are all that is left of their kind. He tells her that the mystics that they have under the palace have been seeking any other Asteri survivors and any other planets where they might be hiding. They allowed Bryce to live after the demon attack because she is the key to opening the doors between worlds again, and that she will undo the actions of one ignorant princess 15,000 years ago. He has coordinated this entire plan to get Bryce to the palace so he can use the horn and open the gates so he can travel in the cosmos again. So she refuses, and he asks about Hunt and Rune being there. He knew Danica had been onto them and that she had become curious after searching through her own bloodline's history and suspecting the truth. He said Danica realized that the shifters are also Fae. He describes that they are 2 different kinds of Fae. Bryce's kind dwelled in a lovely, verdant land rich with magic, that her starborn bloodline hailed from a small isle a few miles from the mainland. And all of us readers say, Prithian? He says only a select few from her world were able to shift their humanoid forms to animal ones, but that the Midgard shifters were Fae from a different planet, and on their planet, all of the Fae shared their form with an animal. And all of us say, the Throne of Glass world? The Fae that Rune and Bryce and the Autumn King descend from are from Prithian, and that Danica and the Wolves shifters are from the Throne of Glass world. He says the mare descended from them too, that they may have once shared a world with her breed of Fae, but they had been alone on their planet for long enough to develop their own gifts. He says that the Asteri bred the pointed ears out of that line of Fae. She realizes the way he describes the isle of her home world as a near permanent twilight, and she realizes that also describes dusk. She realizes that that's why Danica called it Dusk's Truth, not only for the name of the room she was in, but also hinting at their home world. Bryce asks why they lied to everyone. He says they couldn't allow the 2 breeds to unify together against them, so they made them turn against each other instead. The shifters easily forgot what they had once been. Bryce asks about Project Thur and why Danica was interested in it. He says Thur was the last time someone got as far as Danica did in learning about them. So he thinks she wanted to learn from their mistakes because she wanted to tell everyone what they were. And that's all we know about that. He says after getting in touch with Ophion, they put her in contact with Sophie Renast because she was one of their most talented agents. But Sophie also had a theory about energy from what her Thunderbird gifts sensed while using First Light. And Bryce is starting to realize she's made a pretty huge mistake by coming there. Rigellus says that the Asteri had been notified by one of their mystics who learned it from prying into the mind of one of Ophion's command. So they set everything up with Micah, the synth, and Danica, that they had Micah kill Danica for them and he didn't even know it. Bryce realizes she's heard as much as she needs to know, and she jumps up to leave, and he tells her she can run if it will make her feel better, and then she teleports before Rigellus can say more. When she teleports, she doesn't see Rune, but Hunt is there with his hands behind his head, already bound with Gorgon manacles, and the Harpy puts them around Bryce too. So back at the lab, Therian sees Pippa shoot Cormac in the chest and leaves a gaping hole. They turn and see 5 of the Asteri have arrived. Cormac sets himself ablaze and burns Pippa alive with him, along with others, and then his blaze keeps growing. Therian runs before he can see if his blaze gets to the Asteri. As he's running, he sees white light in the sky, and he believes it's the Asteri's magic. And when he's a half mile away, the entire building explodes, taking Cormac, the suits, and the rebels with it. Then back at the palace, Rune is in a cell, chained to the wall with Gorgon manacles with Mordok. He's already been beaten. Rune wonders if Day had betrayed him and pretended to be captured so he'd come there. Then Hunt and Bryce are brought to his cell, also shackled, and Rune asks Mordok how he knew he'd be there. Mordok says because Rigellus planned it that way. Mordok tells them he's been tracking them all around Lunathian from their scents, keeping Rigellus updated on everything they were doing. He said he usually reports to the Hind, but he reported to Rigellus for this case because he had a special interest in their group. Mordock tells Hunt that his scent is wrong, not like any other angel he's scented. So some other kind of clue about what we're going to learn about Hunt's background in the next book. Then the Harpy tells Mordock to leave them despite his orders, that she wants to have fun with them before the Hind comes. Then Hunt tries to taunt the Harpy so that she'll torture him and not Rune or Bryce. Bryce screams for her to get away from Rune. Then as the Harpy stabs his neck, the Hind comes out of nowhere and tackles her and stands between her and Rune. And when she does, Rune recognizes her scent immediately. He recognizes that her scent is somehow entwined with his own, even though very slightly, like a shadow. He says most people wouldn't recognize it. And the Harpy says she always knew and calls the Hind a traitor. Rune says, "Day?" ? And she replies with night. And so he knows that Day is the Hind, Lydia Cerebos. And everyone was very surprised by this, or not surprised if they guessed it. This is one of the big surprises of the book. And the Harpy tells her the Asteri will carve her up and feed her to the Dreadwolves for this, but Lydia says not if she kills her first. So they fight, and Lydia shoves her into Rune's reach, where he gets her down and the Hind cuts her head off. Lydia tells him they don't have much time and that he has to get out of there, and that she had tried to warn him before she was interrupted by Pollux that they knew they were coming to the palace and that he was going to be thrown into the dungeons. So she was trying to tell him that they knew about their plan, not that she was being taken to the dungeons. And when she realized that only Sandriel's Triari knew of Rigellus' plans, she knew that warning him would give herself away, so she didn't warn him. Lydia tells them that she didn't kill Sophie, but that she was the one who had called for the city ship. The white stone that she dropped into the ocean both times was what called them, that they summon whatever city ship is closest when dropped in the water. Hunt asks Bryce if she found out the truth, and she says yes, but she isn't able to tell him before they hear steps, and Lydia tells them it's Pollux coming. She begs them to make it look real, that the information lines can't be broken, so she's making it clear she's not ready to give up her spot as a spy. Bryce understands and punches her in the face, and then Rune thinks he sees Lydia whisper something in Bryce's ear before Pollux pulls her off. And Rune cannot put the Hind and Day together in his mind. When the Hind replaced Bryce's manacles, she did not secure them, so she looks at Hunt with pain and full of love, because they all know that Bryce has to get out because she has the intel, she has the truth, and they need her to get out. And Hunt realizes he's holding her hand for the last time. Lydia tries to speak to Rune in his mind, but he blocks her out. He can't handle that Lydia has voluntarily given herself over to Pollux and let him hurt her over and over so she could keep feeding the rebels intel. He's confused why he feels like he needs the wall between him and Lydia, but at the same time he also wants to murder Pollux for touching her. He's afraid that Lydia has so much blood on her hands that there would never be any washing it away. Bryce knows no one is coming to save them. She knows Rigellus wouldn't have told her all that he did if he planned to let her walk out alive. And she knows that the cycle has to stop, and that other worlds had managed to overthrow the Asteri before, and that they could too. And she wonders if Jessica knows the truth. When they're being walked down a hallway toward the throne room, Bryce sees a quartz gate. She's afraid Rigellus plans to have her open it as a test before she opens the rifts. She knows she would do it because of what he's going to threaten to do to Hunt and Rune. They're taken to the throne room where Rigellus is the only Asteri present. He's seated on his throne, which is glowing and funneling first light into him, empowering him more. And he tells Bryce he hopes she's ready to pay for the death of the Harpy. Hunt sees his wings and all of the Fallens mounted above the thrones. After the first rebellion, they all had their wings cut off and they were placed above the thrones of the Asteris as a reminder of the failed rebellion. So Hunt's wings are there with Shahar's in the middle and all of his friends beside them, and he sees them as a reminder of his failure and how he should have avoided where he had gotten. Then Baxian and Mordock join them in the throne room beside the Hind and the Hammer blocking their way out. He realizes Rigellus knew about their mission before they even reached Pangera's shores, and Hunt wonders if Baxian is on their side or not, if he'd been part of the trap. Bryce tells Rigellus no one else is involved, and she tells everyone in the room the truth that she'd learned, that the Asteri are intergalactic parasites who tricked them into making the drop so that they can feed off their first light and then feed off their soul's second light when they die. Rigellus laughs, knowing this is her way of telling her companions what she knows, and then she also starts to say that if they destroy the core of first light beneath the palace, but Rigellus silences her and his power is shuddering. So she's onto something with telling them if they destroy the core of first light that they could take the Asteri down, but she isn't able to tell them before Rigellus stops her. And Bryce looks at Hunt and he knows there's more she hasn't said. Rigellus asks Rune who's been helping them. He tells them that he knows Cormac had been helping and that he had for a while, and he wanted to see where and to who he led them. Rigellus tells them that Cormac is dead now, and that's where his siblings, the other Asteri, are at the lab, and that they reported another male had been there and fled. Rigellus says Cormac incinerated himself in the lab and Pippa Spetsos. So everyone is glad to hear that Tharion got away, and they're upset about Cormac. Personally, I do not think that Cormac is dead. He could be, because Sarah J. Maas is known to kill people off before, but I have a feeling that they just captured him and he is not dead and he is going to show up again. Or maybe I'm just hoping he does because I liked his character. Then Rigellus asks Rune if he should call his father to assist with the questioning since he was so skilled at wielding his fire to get things out of him when he was a boy. So he knows that he was tortured by the Autumn King. Rigellus points out that Rune's tattoos are to hide the scars, and he says he's sorry he'll have to ruin some of his ink this time around, just implying that they're about to torture him. It's not going to go well for Rune. Then Rune tells Bryce she brought him so much joy. He's just preparing to die or to never see her again. And Bryce steps forward and tells Rigellus that she'll open a portal for him if he agrees to let them go and leave them unharmed forever. Hunt realizes that is why Rigellus lured them here to use the horn on Bryce, and he is nervous. Then Rigellus tells them that he had impersonated Adis that day in her apartment, that he broke through her wards, pretended to be the cat, and encouraged them toward rebel activities, and that he had anticipated their every move. Hunt says they're not rebels and Celestina would vouch for them. Rigellus says, oh, you mean Celestina, who had just reported to him that they had lied about visiting Bryce's parents and had reported to him as soon as Hunt left the barracks that he was heavily armed, and so they're disappointed because they thought Celestina had their back. Rune asks why he's doing this. Rigellus says, for survival. But then he says Bryce's first task will be a bit personal, and they think he's going to ask her to open a gate to hell, that they have some personal war with hell. He says, no, they're up there as my enemies, but there's someone that I hate even more, that I want to get back first. And Rigellus tells them that the star on Bryce's chest is a beacon to the world from which the Fae originally came, and that it sometimes glows when nearest the Fae with undiluted bloodlines from that world, like it did with Cormac, for those that she chooses as her loyal companions, like it does with Hunt. Rigellus says her star will lead them back to that world through her, that they overthrew his brethren who once ruled there, and that they have not forgotten. Their first attempt at revenge was foiled by her ancestor who also bore that star in her chest. He says their home world is rich in magic and he craves more of it. Bryce maintains her bargain with him, and he tells her that she can tell Rune and Hunt goodbye as a thank you for assisting him. When she tells them goodbye, Hunt whispers something to her and he looks at her for the last time. He says he loves her and that their love is stronger than time, greater than any distance, that their love spans across stars and worlds, and he will find her again, and he kisses her. Then when she goes to Rune, he whispers what the Oracle had actually told him, that she said the royal line would end with him. Maybe the Oracle hadn't seen her, hadn't seen Bryce, and that she has to live. She has to be queen. And Rune tells her in her mind to grab the star sword when she goes. Bryce had used the key that the Hind slipped her to unlock Rune and Hunt's manacles when she hugged them, and Rune tells Bryce to go to hell through that gate and bring Hell's armies back with her to fight the Asteri. But he tells her if Apollyon's cost is too high not to return to their world. And Rune says, long live the queen, which was their signal, and she doesn't even give the others a chance to wonder what he meant, and she grabs the star sword and blasts Rigellus with starlight before he can do anything. At the same time, Hunt strikes a marble pillar above the crystal throne, trying to slow Rigellus down, and Pollux lunges for Bryce, but Baxian tackled him to the ground, so they know Baxian is on his side. And Mordok was already bleeding from a gash on his throat, and the Hind was on the floor unconscious. So Baxian had knocked out the Hind, sliced Mordok, and he went for Pollux to try to give them all time. And Bryce raced through the doors, turning to the gate. Hunt turned back to Rigellus, but too late. He was glowing like a god, and he leaped off the dais and barreled after Bryce with death in his eyes. Each step she ran from the throne room was cracking Bryce's heart. Her heart is breaking that she has to leave Rune and Hunt, but she knows that she has no choice if she wants to save their world. Then she senses Rigellus' power chasing behind her, and she plans to open a gate to hell and take her chances with the princes there to use their armies in Midgard. Rigellus gains on her, and lightning comes striking down the hall, and Bryce welcomes it into the tattoo that is the horn. Hunt uses his lightning to charge up the horn. Lightning came from her star, and it shoots right into the archway of the gate, and that the air of the gate's arch turned black and murky, like she had opened a portal. But Rigellus' fingers grab her hair right as she's teleporting to the gate, and when she teleports, she only gets 10 feet ahead, that her powers had hit a wall, similar to what the Underking had used to trap Hypaxia and Ethan. So Bryce knows she can only teleport 10 feet at a time, so she teleports 10 feet at a time through the wards to get to the gate. She teleports behind Rigellus, blasts a wall of light into his face, and then teleports once more 10 feet from the gate, and then she runs into the portal. She describes it as catching her, sticky like a web, and then time slows to a drip. Bryce uses her power to will the gate to take her and her alone, and then the last thing she heard before the gate swallowed her whole was Rigelus screaming no. Back at the palace, we see that Hunt has been gagged with a Gorgon stone along with Rune and Baxian. They have Gorgon manacles around their arms, their throats, they have a stone in their mouth. They're not taking any chances this time. And Rigelus is taking Hunt by the gate where Bryce went before he takes him to the dungeons. Hunt hopes she was able to make it to Hell, and he knows he probably won't be around to see if she brings Hell's armies back. Rigelus makes Hunt kneel before the gate, and Pollux holds his head, and he thinks he's about to be beheaded, but then Rigelus's power begins to weave another halo tattoo on his forehead. And this is the worst possible scenario to him. He cannot imagine being enslaved again. So he says pain erupted through his soul, his muscles, his blood, as if the very marrow were being burned into mist. Sounds terrible. It says the halo kept spreading over his skull, worse than any Gorgon shackle. And then Hunt knew nothing at all. There are so many theories about this. Like, we are all unwell. Either way, this is not good for our boy Hunt. One of the biggest theories, which I am inclined to believe, but I am terrified and hope it is not true, that because Rigelus gave him another halo tattoo and it spread over his skull, that they have wiped his memories and that he is gonna like become a robot for the Asteri. And we are terrified for it. Then it gets to the end where we all lose our ever-loving minds. Bryce lands in Hell, or so she thinks. She sees the star sword on the ground beside her and she gets up to go to it, and she swore she could hear Hunt screaming, echoing as she fell. Whenever Rigelus puts the tattoo on Hunt's head, it says he releases a soul scream, that he is so broken by it. He screams, and Hunt wonders if this was Rigelus's true purpose, in hopes that that scream would reach Bryce somewhere through the gate. He has that last thought before he thinks nothing at all. But then Bryce says that she swore she could hear Hunt screaming, echoing as she fell. Then she realizes that she's landed on someone's lawn. She sees a river and an ancient, beautiful city behind it. It looks like a Pangeran postcard. It's like an old, beautiful city. Instantly, she feels something icy and sharp pressing against her throat, and a male voice speaks above and behind her in a language she doesn't recognize. But by his tone, she knew she wasn't supposed to move, and she can feel that she only has splintered shards of her power remaining. She thinks the being who has her is a demon because she thinks that she's in hell. She says he's beautiful and that she knows his voice promises pain. So she begs to see Adis and asks him to take her to Adis. His eyes widen when he sees the sword beside her. Bryce begins crying and begging him to please take her to Adis. Then he blindfolds her and picks her up, flying her somewhere. And Bryce recognizes the sound of his wings as being much different than Hunt's. Not a soft rippling like Hunt's feathers, but a leathery flap. So we know that this is Azrael, that Azrael has found her in Valeris. We lose it. So then he takes her somewhere and she finds it odd that she's smelling roses and bread in hell. And then he sits her in a chair and she keeps asking for Adis. She tells him she needs to find Prince Adis because her world is in grave danger and she needs to help her mate. And she takes off the blindfold. She recognizes that she's in a house, and she says that the style reminds her of her father's study and of Jessiba's gallery. So these are two of the oldest people in Crescent City. Jessiba and the Autumn King have been told to have been alive for hundreds of years. Just information. Then she calms down and asks where she is. She asks what level of hell she's in. Then he repeats, hell? And she's like, yes. And then suddenly people come in. Bryce sees and immediately recognizes someone with similarities to Fury, as she has the same angular eyes like Fury. We know it's Amren. And Bryce realizes that she's Fae. And she says that Amren is in beautiful but old-fashioned clothes like what they wear in Abilene. And she recognizes one of the males and another female also as Fae, who we know is Cassian and Nesta. And they're wearing the same clothes. She keeps trying to talk to them, asking if this is hell. Amren says something that makes them all look at her. Since this isn't working, Bryce tries the only other language she knows, which is the old language of the Fae. And in that language, she asks if this world is hell and that she needs Prince Adis. Amren staggers back with a hand to her mouth and she is shocked. And the others are shocked that Amren is shocked, like they never see this from Amren. And Amren looks at the star sword then, and then back to Azrael. And he draws a hilted knife from his side, and Bryce says that it could have been the twin of the star sword, that it was black hilted and bladed. And the star sword began to hum within its sheath, glittering white light leaking from the sheath. Azrael drops the dagger as it flares with dark light, that the star sword is Alpha and Omega, dark and light. Amren says Gwydion and points to the star sword. Then Bryce again asks if this is hell in the old language. Amren replies to Bryce that no one has spoken that language in this world world for over 15,000 years. Then Bryce wonders if she's traveled through time somehow, or maybe hell is in a different time. She asks for Prince Adis again, and Amren says she doesn't know who that is. Bryce asks for Apollyon, the Prince of the Pit. Amren says she doesn't know of such people, and this world is not hell. Bryce asks where she is, and then Feyre and Rhys arrive. And when Bryce sees Rhys, she gasps and calls him Rune. She recognizes his eyes as the same shade of violet blue as Rune's, that his short hair is the same gleaming black, and Rhys's skin is browner, but the face, the posture, it was her brother's, and he had the leathery wings that the other two males had. So then Rhys looks at her, the blood on her, and the star sword she carries, and she says when he looks at her, she sees stars in his eyes, actual stars. Then Bryce tells Amren her world, Midgard, is in grave danger, and her mate, that she didn't mean to come there and she meant to go to hell. She needs help from the princes of hell, and she doesn't know what this world is or how to find hell, but she asks for their help. Amren tells everyone what Bryce said, and Feyre asks Bryce a question. Then Amren translates that they're asking for her name. She introduces herself as Bryce Quinlan, and then Rhys steps forward and in the old language introduces himself to her as Rhysand. And we all collectively scream. We did not know this was coming, but it was all we could have ever wished for to see more of our favorite people. Then that is the end of Bryce's story, and this is where it leaves us. It has left us that Bryce is in Valeris with Rhys and all of our favorite people, and we don't know what they're going to do to help her. And Rune and Hunt and Baxian are prisoners of the Asteri, and they are in the dungeons, and there are so many loose ends. Before we get to that, there is an epilogue where we see Ethan outside of the astronomer's place where he's guarding the wolf mystic. And while he's there, Amelie Ravenscroft shows up, who is the alpha of his old pack. When she sees him, she leaves. And then Ethan gets a call from Tristan Flynn that they need him to come home. Stuff went down at the palace and they need to tell him about it and they need his help. Ethan doesn't want to leave because he's guarding this girl. He decides to go wake up the mystic. He goes inside the astronomer's place. Instead of pulling her out of the tank this time, he just keeps talking to the mystic, trying to tell her to come out of it. And finally, at the very end, it says she opens her eyes. The lost Fendir heir had been found. And then it ends. And that is where it leaves us. We don't know what's going to happen. There were so many things from this book that I had completely forgotten even existed in the storyline. And when I did this recap and read it and took so many detailed notes, there are so many storylines within this plot that haven't been resolved that we know book 3 is going to be good. So we are excited for House of Flame and Shadow. It is coming on January 30th, and then we will find out what happens next. Thanks for watching. Follow along if you want to talk more books, because we all know books make life better.